Nick, could you go on to mute, please? Thank you. Good evening, everybody, on this on the final hours of Armistice Day. It's 6:30 and I should commence this meeting of the Development Control Committee in virtual session. For the benefit of the members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I'd like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Paul Miller and I'm the chairman of this committee. Could I ask that everybody goes on to mute, please? Thank you. This committee meeting is being held virtually in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the published government regulations implementing the Coronavirus Act. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will be available to view after the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions on the applications before us are identified by name on the screen. Ward councillors addressing the committee will be introduced by name. Can I ask the officers who will be advising the committee to introduce themselves and their role?
Anne Greaves, Legal Services Manager.
Craig Chapman, Assistant Planning Manager.
Bernadette, Democratic Services Officer.
Catherine Fitzherbert Green, I'm Principal Planning Officer and I'm introducing item 1. Thank you.
Lucy Page, Principal Planning Officer.
Russell Stock, Senior Planning Officer.
Thank you very much. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be assessing the material brought before us and listening to the representations made and will make decisions based on planning reasons. In reaching these decisions, we are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. I understand that planning decisions can be emotive and ask that everybody remains polite and professional and patient throughout the meeting in case of any slight delay in presentations. Can I now remind both members and officers of the procedures that we'll be using as this meeting is virtual. Unless speaking, officers will have their videos switched off to provide clarity as to who the committee members are for those watching and participating. At this point, can I ask all officers present to switch off their video? The officers present will only switch their video link on during the item they are presenting or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. For this virtual meeting, councillors should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the member code of conduct and ensure they're not disturbed during the evening? Can members ensure their mobile phones are now switched off or on silent? Can members of the committee turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they've been invited to speak by the chair? Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote on the item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when I, as chair, invite them to do so. When we move into debate of the application, may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and to keep any comments on each agenda item to matters of fact. And also to keep their comments to a maximum of 4 minutes. As chair, I will confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda before they address the committee by audio link. Councillors should state if they have any declaration of interest or if they have predetermined an item on the agenda that they are leaving the meeting and switch off their video link. They can then switch on their video link and rejoin when I call the next agenda item. Where a member of the committee has a predetermined position on an application and is registered to speak under the public speaking scheme, they will stand down from the meeting and will only be able to participate as a visiting councillor by audio link. They will then rejoin the meeting as a member of the committee once the application has been determined. At the appropriate time, I'll invite speakers to contribute to the meeting by audio link in the order set out in the update paper, but I will reserve the right to reorder the speaking in the event that technical difficulties occur. I will ask each speaker to confirm their name and interest in the item before commencing their contribution. I would ask that points made by visiting speakers are material planning considerations relating to facts. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to keep points made on the application to material reasons only. Any questions from members of the committee to speakers should be related to matters of fact related to the application and not opinion. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. Voting will take place by a roll call, and I'll confirm the recommendation that is to be voted before the voting begins. When each member unmutes their microphone to vote, they should leave a small pause before speaking to allow their vote to be heard. Can each member then indicate whether they are for or against a recommendation or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully, we will not have any IT problems, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost, they should immediately advise the Democratic Support Officer to use their meeting link to join the meeting again. Right, we'll commence the agenda. And first, I will ask for any apologies for absence and substitutions. I have been notified of nothing to date. No, and we're all present. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a statement, really. Item 5, I am not predetermined in this matter. I'd simply like this application to be discussed by this committee, and so I intend to be taking part in the debate. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Item 5, again, I am predetermined on this, so I will leave the meeting for that item.
Thank you very much. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Item 3, I think, for avoidance of any doubt, I will consider myself to be predetermined on this particular matter and therefore not be participating. Thank you.
That's item 3. Thank you. Any more while we're here? No urgent matters have been passed to me. Minutes of the meetings held on the 23rd of September and the 7th of October Unless there are any comments as to the accuracy within those minutes, I will move to have those approved. No comments. We'll take that as approved unless there's any objection. Thank you. And we move on to applications for planning permission. And we move into item 1. And can I check in that Mr. Parry is available, please?
Yes, I'm present.
Thank you, Mr. Parry. If you'd just like to hang fire, and the officers will introduce the application.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 1 before you this evening is for the site of Oakley Hall, Oakley, where outline planning permission is being sought with consideration of the principle of development for the erection of up to 33 dwellings and with consideration of access only. Matters relating to the layout, appearance, landscaping and scale are therefore reserved for later consideration. Members will note from the report that the site is an allocated site within the Oakley and Dean neighbourhood plan, and access is to be created taking a spur from the existing internal driveway within the estate to serve the site. I would first bring members' attention to the update paper, and this sets out corrections to the reasons for approval 1 and 2, to the terminology used on page 55 with regards to nitrate neutrality, and to an informative. It also contains a late consultation response from the landscape officer and responds to questions raised by Councillor Taylor about statutory consultation processes during the planning application process and also the neighbourhood plan making process. The application before you is recommended for permission as per the agenda, which contains a number of conditions and informatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe it's Councillor Parry. Councillor, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. I hope I won't use 4 minutes to say that on behalf of the Oakley and Dean Parish Council, we do support this application. I wanted to make the point quite strongly, as it's part of the neighbourhood plan which was agreed in 2016. We do understand there may have been some concerns from local residents in Dean, and I do understand those frustrations, but the neighbourhood plan was approved by the electorate in 2016 by an overwhelming majority, and this particular proposal was part of the neighbourhood plan. So from our perspective, we do support this application. We've had certainly conversations, which I think has been very good, with the proposed developers. My only drawback is a general comment about the planning processes, which is obviously one would like to see more affordable housing and potentially more retirement dwellings, but my parish council support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions to the councillor? There are none. No. Thank you very much, Councillor Parry.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening.
Good evening. And Mr. Payne, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can, Mr. Payne. You're loud and clear. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Excellent. I assume that everyone has seen the letter and attachments that I sent on Monday. I am the only objector speaking because we have tried to make the most of the extremely limited time allowed. I flagged 4 key points in my letter. I also have some brief points on the planning officer's report. First, the proposed development would dwarf the small rural conservation area of Dean. Dean has approximately 40 residents, and a development of 33 family homes could end up with over 3 or 4 times that number. In reality, we are talking about a brand new village on a pristine greenfield site in the middle of the countryside, far beyond the Oakley settlement boundary and a long way from any local services. That cannot be right. Second, the application site is 12.5 hectares. Granting this application would set a precedent for something even more substantial than a housing estate of 33 homes. Third, permission has already been granted for well in excess of 150 homes in Oakley. That is the maximum number the community was told it had to accommodate, and any more would be unsustainable. Fourth, As I explained in my letter, there is a serious conflict of interest in relation to this application, which must be investigated by the relevant authority. Turning then to the planning officer's report, the starting point is that the policies in the local plan and the neighbourhood plans have to be considered out of date. This is noted at page 16 of the planning officer's report. Therefore, we have to follow paragraph 11 of the National Planning Policy Framework. This is at page 16 of the report. On either basis set out in paragraph 11, it is crystal clear the application must be refused. And I have 3 short points. The first point is that the proposed development would be contrary to paragraph 78 and 79 of the policy framework, which are 2 of the policies that should protect the Oakley Hall site and the Dean Conservation Area. The development would not enhance or maintain the viability of our rural community as required under paragraph 78. The planning officer accepts this at the top of page 18 of the report. We say it would have a devastating impact. Furthermore, under paragraph 79, the development of isolated homes in the countryside can only be allowed in very limited circumstances, but none of the conditions apply here. Again, the planning officer accepts this. This is at pages 17 and 18 of her report. This is crucial. The application would contravene paragraph 78 and 79 of the policy framework. It follows that under paragraph 11, the application must be refused. My second point is that the application breaches numerous other planning policies. For example, this is not sustainable development as required under the National Policy Framework. It breaches numerous policies in the local plan, as I listed in Appendix 4 to my letter. For example,
you have 1 minute, sir.
Policy SS6 is just not satisfied. The only answer given is that Oakley Hall was allocated for development in the neighbourhood plan, but this is wrong, and this is my last point. The neighbourhood plan is out of date. In any event, the neighbourhood plan did not provide for 33 full residential homes. Full residential homes at Oakley Hall were never consulted on. It was only ever retirement dwellings. Even with the changes made by the inspector, it is crystal clear from the neighbourhood plan that development at Oakley Hall is limited to approximately 30 retirement dwellings centred around the Oak Lodge Care Home. This is explained in the note at attachment 2 to my letter. It is critical. I don't have time to go into why the neighbourhood plan process was unlawful and unfair, but the short point is that the interests of Dean residents were simply ignored. Allowing this application in conclusion would be vandalism, and that is not an exaggeration. And I implore the committee to see this application for what it is and refuse it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If there are any questions, I'm very happy to try to field them, but I appreciate that's probably not my role this evening. I hope that's
well. Thank you, Mr. Payne. I do offer the committee the chance to ask you any questions if they consider that appropriate. Committee, any questions for the speaker? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell us how far this is from the sort of heart of Dean hamlet itself?
It can be seen from Dean. I believe from the planning officer's report, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, that it's about 500 metres. If you know the not the entrance into Dean by the old Dean Gate Inn, but the other entrance, it is just up the road. So we're not talking about a development that is sort of several miles away. It really is on the doorstep. I said adjacent to the Dean Conservation Area, and that really is what it is.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne.
Thank you. Thank you very much, councillors.
Okay. May I call Mr. Murray Cox, please?
Good evening, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Mr. Murray Fox, and you have got 4 minutes.
Thank you. I'm speaking to you this evening on behalf of the applicants Cove Construction and the Fogarty Group Limited. The application before you is for an allocated site, but follows a very significant period of engagement, starting with the preparation of the neighbourhood plan in 2013. The preparation of the neighbourhood plan was heavily informed by consultation on the distribution of sites for development, including the proposal for new homes at Oakley Hall. Following an independent examination, the plan was then considered by the council and made or adopted in May 2016, and the site was therefore allocated in the development plan. In that sense, it carries the same status as a site allocated in the local plan. Since the adoption of the neighbourhood plan, the applicants first undertook a significant amount of work to ensure that any future proposals would be technically sound and be based upon a rigorous analysis of the site and the local area. In addition, a collaborative pre-application process followed, undertaken over a lengthy period of time, with engagement between the applicants' advisors on matters such as heritage, landscape, design, highways and planning, amongst others, and their counterparts on behalf of the council. A public consultation event was held in the summer of 2018, with invitations sent to over 2,000 addresses in the neighbourhood plan area. The feedback gained during that process has been fundamental to the scheme, which is now being considered this evening, as it influenced the location of housing with the overall site area allocated, which is significantly larger than which is required for 33 homes, the layout of the development and the proposed architectural approach. The planning application was then submitted in December 2018, and the applicants and your officers have continued to work together in order to address matters proactively in order to bring the application to committee with a positive recommendation. As a consequence, this application is not subject to any objections from officers or consultees on technical matters. You've heard that paragraph 11 of the framework should apply. That is right, it should. Paragraph 11 of the framework tells you that proposals that are in accordance with the development plan should be approved without delay. That is precisely the case here. Many of you will be aware that Oakley Hall has been transformed by these applicants who acquired it in a dilapidated state in 1993, and since then have restored it with care and attention to what you see today. That same care and attention has been applied to this application, and we encourage you to support the proposals this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee, any questions to the applicant? No questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Murray Cox. And could I ask Councillor Diane Taylor and Councillor Diane Taylor, please?
Mr. Chairman, I've just picked up that she's having trouble getting in.
Sorry, hello.
Oh,
She's here.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I did have trouble, but I'm here now. I haven't quite heard everything, but thank you very much. And I'm sure you can hear me.
Yes, indeed, Diane, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. I won't be using up 4 minutes. I really mainly just wanted to clear up any misunderstandings, if there are any, or any questions from you. But as far as I'm concerned, and this is in a nutshell, and much is stated on the report, this site is included in the Oakley and Dean neighbourhood plan, which was properly and efficiently formulated with all the necessary consultations. The relevant neighbourhood plan policy itself states that this site is allocated for approximately 30 homes with no other specification. I believe the neighbourhood plan must be respected, even if it isn't exactly what we'd all want. How can we resist unwanted development that isn't part of the local plan if we don't support the plan itself? And that has to be my position, and I therefore have no objections to this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And members, do you have any questions for Councillor Taylor? Councillor David Potter.
Thank you. Hello, Councillor Taylor. Madam Mayor, I guess as well, but can I just be clear in terms of my position on this? When the neighbourhood plan was so carefully constructed, and you obviously were happy with the site to be put forward for approximately 30 dwellings, presumably you anticipated the normal 40% provision of affordable housing on the site, did you?
That would have been the original, except that this is a very exceptional site. I don't know how much has been explained to you, but obviously because it's in unusual land, it's not on a normal road, it has all sorts of facilities aren't there. And I know that the applicants did consult with the housing associations to see if this could be achieved. And of course, I think the services would just be too expensive for them to be able to achieve. So they are obviously giving a contribution instead.
I mean, if I may, I mean, clearly, I have a view on this, and I'll express it later regarding its exceptional nature. But as a committee, of course, we're not provided with the viability financial analysis that's summarised within the report. We're never trusted with this, so clearly we're not really aware of the detailed exchanges that have taken place. Are you saying the parish council was provided with that?
I don't know. I don't know what the parish council was provided with, but I do know that they have been in extensive talks with housing associations to see if 40% can be achieved. But I think, obviously you haven't been to see the site, but I think you would appreciate if you saw it, that there are so many constraints that would mean that it isn't suitable.
Thank you for that. I mean, I haven't been to see it recently, but I know the site, and I'll reserve my comments and questions elsewhere, but thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you.
Councillor Tilbury.
Hello. Oh, hello. Can you hear
Good
me?
evening, Good. Yes, Ian, we can, and you have 4 minutes.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, the reason I've become embroiled in this, not involved, I'm actually adjacent ward councillor, but my ward is virtually next door to this and considerably closer to this site than anyone in Oakley. And the residents in Stephen, other than the people in Dean, of course, but of course, as you've probably heard from Mr. Payne earlier, you know, the people in Dean are not very happy with this. They've been sort of left out on the limb, but so are the people in Steventon. I mean, Councillor Taylor, I think it's noted in the update that they were consulted, but there's a difference between being consulted and anyone taking any notice of you. The reality is the only people who could vote on the Oakley neighbourhood plan are the people of Oakley. And that comes to the second problem. It's Oakley and Dean Parish Council. It's actually a group of parish councils. There's Oakley Civil Parish and Dean Civil Parish. And at some point they've sort of merged into one. But the problem is there's about 50 people in Dean and 5,000 in Oakley. So as you can probably guess, the people in Dean don't get much of a say in anything. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happened here. You know, this site's been imposed on the civil parish of Dean by people in Oakley, which they're perfectly entitled to do under the neighbourhood plan system. But I don't think that makes it right, does it? It'd be like, you know, as in Overton, we build all our 150 houses, we'll build them all out at Ash or up at Popham Airfield, you know, because it suits us, because they're nowhere near us. I mean, the point that Mr. Payne also made is that the neighbourhood plan is out of date. So, and in this case, that's probably not a bad thing, because rather like the Overton neighbourhood plan, there are all sorts of, this highlights the fundamental problems with neighbourhood plans, where people do things for the best of intentions, but of course they thought they were getting a retirement site. That isn't going to happen there unless they accept the much larger site, which is would be coming to you at some point in the future for 150 houses. So you know, there's a lack of consultation with the people who matter, and even if they are consulted, they're outnumbered. You know, they are a minority. You know, Oakley Hall is technically in Dean Civil Parish. I mean, the whole issue of all of this, you know, I mean, if you look at the site, if you look on the maps, the boundary of my ward is the Wayfarers Walk, again, which is a very well-known long-distance footpath, walkers, cyclists, horse riders. This will be virtually next door to this there. It will impact on that historically there, but the biggest reason, and the one reason to chuck this out, is the affordable housing. The reason it's unsuitable for affordable housing is because they allocated a 12.5 hectare site for 30 houses. Now, normal planning density for housing is around about 30 houses per hectare. This is, you know, this is roughly one house per, or was it two and a bit houses per hectare? I mean, that is ridiculous. They've allocated far too much land, and the reason being is because they want to build 150 on there, which is what was put forward in the neighbourhood plan originally. So
you have 1 minute, Councillor.
They've set themselves up for this there. So this is just a bad development, and it's in the wrong place. You know, I mean, I think unfortunately, with the best of intentions, and we saw this in Overton, people were bamboozled by developers into thinking they were going to get one thing and they've got something else. I mean, to say we can't get affordable housing on a site of 33 houses because the service charge would be too high, well, they'd be too high for the people who live there as well. What we will end up, if this is built, is an upmarket housing development for incredibly rich people in the middle of the countryside. Would we normally allow that? No, we wouldn't. And the fact that it's been sort of sneaked through the neighbourhood plan is just wrong. And the fact that it's on my doorstep, and I think it's sad really that the residents have had to come to me for help, because they are totally left out of this. Ironically, I wouldn't even be their ward councillor if we'd have had the elections in May. They would have been back in, Steventon would be back in Oakley, and they could have ignored them as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions for Councillor Tilbury? No questions. Thank you, Councillor.
Oh, I've got one.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Evening, Ian. So your principal objection is that it's inappropriate housing. The density is too low. It's luxury housing in the middle of a countryside.
Yeah, oh yeah, I can see. Yeah. I mean, that's you can't argue with the neighbourhood plan is what it is. As they said, it's been voted for people. It's been gone through the borough. We can't really object to that. You could possibly argue Mr. Payne's point that the neighbourhood plan is irrelevant now, or the housing allocations are, and of course that works both ways in these cases. There, they can add other ones on. But that is the fundamental problem with this. This is the wrong sort of development. This is just an upmarket housing development in the middle of nowhere that won't provide affordable housing because the site's too large and the management cost will be too high. What sort of development are we trying to build? This is not sustainable, is it? And this is not the mixed and balanced communities that we would normally request. And I'm surprised that the housing department is saying it's unacceptable. So there is a technical issue there straight away, despite what the developers are saying. So they're not saying this is acceptable. It can be achieved. There is no reason you could not have affordable housing on this site. It's just that they've chose to build it in such a way that they're taking up a massive amount of land. It's as simple as that. Hopefully that answers your question, Andy.
Thank you, Councillor Tilbury. Right, questions to officers, members. Councillor Bound, followed by Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor George.
I wonder if Catherine can inform us a little bit more about the question of affordable, and as I understand it, it's there is a provision made for affordable off-site housing, and that's because the scheme, basically, the costs of the scheme on site are too expensive. Could you inform the committee a little bit more about that?
Thank you, Councillor Bound, and hopefully I can try and assist members. So there is a summary contained on page 48 of your agenda that you have before you. In trying to expand upon that a little bit, the first point to make is that the applicants are still looking to make a contribution towards affordable housing, albeit this would be a financial contribution rather than a physical house contribution on the site. And the policy CM1 within the local plan allows for that. It does allow for off-site provision or financial contributions of an equivalent value in these certain circumstances. And then again, that is reiterated and expanded upon within the housing SPD. Now, with regards to this application, some of the key matters had actually been raised by members in terms of why this has been considered to have the exceptional circumstances in relating to the location, the distance from utilities, for example, the sewerage and drainage, other utilities as well, and also because of the on-site landscaping and public open space maintenance requirements. So because the development is a very, very small development, essentially, with just the 33 units in a wider context when we deal with a lot of larger sites, this site has been considered to be too small to be of sort of realistic and affordable interest for the registered providers. And as such, because of the small number of units that they would otherwise benefit from, it's not been considered to be cost effective by the providers themselves. So that has involved, during the course of the application, discussions with our housing department, submissions of further information by the applicant themselves, which has included correspondence from the registered providers. So we do have copies of emails which are confirming that they're not interested. Those have been reviewed and been scrutinised by our housing department. We've also received information on sort of quotes for the maintenance and management of the site as a whole, so we can actually better understand what those service costs were, and those have also been reviewed. So we have put pressure upon the applicant and their agent to provide more information than we would otherwise want. But again, at the end of the day, we've had to draw a conclusion on this with the overall planning balance, and therefore being mindful that policy does allow for a financial contribution to be made, which it means we are still gathering something. That contribution itself would be calculated to the equivalent value of what the developer would otherwise have lost on the overall development cost of the development as a whole if they were providing affordable housing on site. So it is an equivalent amount that would be otherwise secured within a financial contribution within the 106. I hope that explains it a little bit more, but I can just reinforce that we have had a lot of further information. There has been a lot of discussion about this particular matter, because it is, as we've concluded, an exceptional circumstance, and this isn't something we normally would do. I hope that assists.
Can I just follow up, Chair?
Sure.
So it's basically the cost of the site mean that the service charges are going to be so high that providers of affordable housing are not interested. Is that
essentially, yes, they are higher than the affordable housing providers would otherwise have budgeted for. Yes, they are slightly higher.
Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. So if I've understood this correctly, we've got 33 houses, no affordable being built, money being put aside for affordable housing, and the Oakley plan, which I don't have in front of me, the neighbourhood plan is looking at over 100 houses in that vicinity. So the recommendation for approval is on the basis that future affordable housing will be produced in the next few years. I'm just wondering, what the probability that we can't know what the probability is. I'm just wondering if that's the reasoning. And also, I'd just like to get a bit more clarification on what constitutes an isolated community, because that does appear to be tucked away a bit on its own, although it has been said that it's approximately half a kilometre away from Dean, which is a very small community on its own right, but the two appear to have very little to do with each other.
So if I just refer back to the neighbourhood plan itself, yes, this site is a large site in terms of its area, where during the course of the making and the consultation on the Oakley and Dean neighbourhood plan, it was envisaged for a much larger development to occur on that site. And when you read through the supporting text to the housing policies within the neighbourhood plan, there is reference to a retirement village. So there was this sort of discussions taking place at those early stages. Now, as an outcome of the examination on the neighbourhood plan, the references to the larger number of properties was removed, and the actual policy that we are relying upon here, policy 3, allocates the site simply for Oakley Hall, approximately 30 dwellings. There's no reference to retirement within the policy. There's no other stipulation that it should be on a smaller area. It is just that there's an anomaly between the overall site area that was allocated and the number of dwellings. So we have sort of an unusually large site area for the number of properties that are proposed within the policy itself. So as a consequence, yes, we are still seeking affordable housing, but in the form of a contribution to the equivalent of the 40% that they would have otherwise have had to provide on site. So we aren't losing out, essentially. It's just the affordable housing wouldn't be on site. It would be re-provided for elsewhere by virtue of the financial contribution. The second query that you raised was with regards to isolated communities and isolated housing. So from a lot of the reports that we've had and a lot of the applications we've had going to committee, recently, we have often dealing with maybe 1 or 2 houses where we've considered that matter of isolation, where we have drawn reference to case law, where we're looking at whether or not there's sort of a physical and visual separation of a development from the surrounding properties in a particular area. So normally, it's when they're on the fringe of a village, you would probably consider them to be much closer and not necessarily isolated. It's when you do have that physical and visual separation, it does tend to be considered more isolated. And that is touched upon within the report itself. If I draw your attention to page 45, there is reference to the case law that we do generally rely upon when we consider it as isolation. I hope that assists.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Catherine, could I please ask, I'm interested in this density issue and the red line and things like that. I've also noticed that to overcome the nitrates problem, there's an indication that they're going to set aside areas within the development itself or within within the red line to try and, should we say, offset the nitrate. Could I ask two questions on that? Firstly, to what extent is this low density being driven by the need to offset nitrates? Because obviously the higher density, the more houses, the more nitrate you're going to have to offset, and therefore higher land take in terms of offset is required. And secondly, are we going to be able to, if offset is required, are we going to be able to manage to ensure that these areas are offset in perpetuity? In other words, if it's part of a developed area, is that possible? So two questions: what's driving the low densities? Nitrates part of that, and secondly, can we make sure it's continued long term? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so touching first on the density issue, the density would be calculated against the number of properties and the overall site area. This application does have a low density by virtue of the anomaly that I referred to previously, by virtue of the making of the neighbourhood plan and that process. Now, the nitrate issue actually came to light much further down the line after the application had actually been submitted. So the area of land that has been considered to be offset has looked at the number of units that should be or is looking to be provided on site. So it is a proportionate amount by virtue of the amount of nitrates that number of properties could otherwise produce. So there is a link, and the area of land that is looking to be offset is within the red edge, it is within that neighbourhood plan area. And I would also into the nitrate issue, that would be secured through the plan, a management plan, which is referred to be secured within the 106, as detailed on page 29 of your agenda. And again, it's touched upon again within the section in your report on page 55 about nitrates. So it would be there to be secured in perpetuity to address the issue from those properties in perpetuity.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Unless you've got a supplemental.
Yes, just a very quick one. I'm just wondering again in terms of the nitrate area being within the development. Clearly, the cost, I think, of maintaining that would fall on, should we say, the overall management of the site and the manco that's going to run it. Does that then have a bearing on the ability to provide affordable homes?
The management of that area, yes, I mean, it would form part of the management of the overall site. It would go to potentially a management company as part of all the landscaping and maintenance, which had already been considered before that this land had been required to be set aside for the nitrate purpose. It's going to have site sort of a dual purpose in providing some of the public open space, which it would have always had. So it's going to be having a slightly different management regime potentially. For example, you're not going to be adding nitrates to a land where you're trying to remove the nitrates from. So it's probably all coming down to the management of that land, but it was always considered to be set aside for another purpose in any event.
Thank you very much. Members' debate. Councillor Bound.
I'll start off, Chair. I mean, somebody's got to do it. I mean, the report, I thought, set out the reasons for approval very, very, very clearly. I was taken by the fact that the Borough Council, councillor for the area, was supportive of the scheme, and so was the parish. of Oakley, if not Dean. However, my problem with this comes back to the off-site provision for affordable housing. And I tend to agree in part with Councillor Tilbury in that he says that the area set aside for these houses means a very, very low density, which means the houses are very, very expensive. And it would seem to me that the cost of maintenance of the site under a management scheme are going to be very, very, very high. Thus, you can't afford to have any affordable houses on the site. So let's shove them elsewhere. Now, we don't know where they're going to go. We don't know when they're going to go. And I think we as a committee have been very committed to 40% affordable housing, and preferably on the sites. So at the moment, I think I have to be persuaded otherwise in terms of the affordable housing going elsewhere, and I'm waiting with interest to see what other people think about the scheme.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Similar line to Councillor Bowen. I mean, I was impressed, I think, by the contributions of Mr. Payne and Councillor Tilbury. I didn't get a chance to just check it with Catherine, and perhaps I can do it even at this stage, really. I'm still of the view that the committee should be entitled to much more detailed information regarding the viability arguments on affordable housing rather than a couple of paragraph summary of the conclusions that have been reached. And I am very strong on this, really. The 40% affordable is still our very clear policy within the local plan, and that isn't overridden at this stage, and it's a corporate priority of the council. I mean, you can, as Councillor Tilbury said, I mean, I can see the writing on the wall here very clearly, really. This is intended ultimately to be some prestige, high-level development, and quite frankly, putting on the line, the last thing the developer wants is affordable housing on that site, probably, and God forbid that there's some talk about social housing. But I think that, quite frankly, we should stay with the very clear principles we've established in regard to affordable housing. I'd like to know a lot more about the unviability, or whatever the right word is, in regard to the provision of that. And I certainly will not support this application while it makes no provision for on-site affordable housing. And that's the key part of this, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up, Councillor McCormick?
I did, Chair. Yes, I have my doubts about the eventual arrival of the affordable housing. But having said that, I am encouraged by the ward councillor's presentation and her support for the scheme, and on that basis, I would be quite happy to support the recommendation as it stands.
Thank you. Councillor Rawlinson.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of concerns. One with the size of the site compared with the size of the area that's being developed. Seems to me that there's a vast tract of land to the northwest and to the southeast of the site that's included in the red line, but clearly not having any housing planned on it. So I do worry that the status of that land will be changed, and we'll see a further development for more houses at a later date. But that one we'll have to deal with as and when it comes, if it comes. The affordable housing, I don't think, I've always supported the 40% affordable housing, and I really do think that on site is by far the best option. I like to see that that mix of housing, always have done. But putting affordable housing in a location like this causes problems. People who are moving into affordable housing, by definition, don't tend to be rich people, often reliant on public transport, which I don't know how often the buses pass that site, but I suspect it's not very often. And it doesn't look to me as if it's a very easy route to walk into Oakley to do your shopping. It's a problem we've suffered from in Bramley, that people who've moved into Bramley have found themselves isolated because to go anywhere to do anything, they're looking at a train or a bus into Basingstoke, which they often can't afford, and possibly don't have a second car in the house, so a car's not available to them during the day to take kids to school, to take kids to whatever. So I can't support affordable, really don't support affordable housing in this location, whereas I do generally support affordable housing on site in most times. So I think the off-site contribution in this case is probably the best option. So I think that's where I am with it. Thank you.
Councillor Frankham.
Sorry. I'm quite disturbed that this could stigmatise people, quite angry actually, that you are saying people who live in affordable housing will be poor, etc. It's a form of discrimination. I think it's absolutely appalling. We have said about 40%. I think we should stick to the 40%. I think that we are supposed to be a council of principle. And what's the point of having something like, you know, we're going to have 40% and you have a mix and then say this is going to be too posh an area? It's just appalling, and I wouldn't support it as it is at the moment. I just couldn't. And I think this could also set a precedent. I'm very uncomfortable with this and will not be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit I've been listening to all this, and I think the reality is this has gone through the neighbourhood planning process, and I think we need to, you know, the ward councillor Taylor is very much in favour, the parish is much in favour, and I've got, you know, I'm a great believer in decisions being made at local level. I know there's some minor discrepancies here and what have you. I'm not sure exactly of the position regarding affordable housing is in the local neighbourhood plan, but you know, I feel strongly that we ought to, having gone through this process, it's a democratic process, it's much the same as I said of an allocation in the local plan. I think you know, I certainly would be sure supporting it on that basis.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have a little say here because this doesn't set a precedent. There's quite a few applications that this committee has heard over the years where off-site contributions have been perfectly acceptable for affordable housing when situations dictate that they can't be provided on site for various reasons. And I wouldn't like to attempt to say that. The other thing is there is a paragraph, I believe it's on page 55. It was to do with the nitrate neutrality, and it's been clarified that the offset for nitrate neutrality will invariably be in the form of trees. It's not in any detail, and that would be provided within the red line. But the point was made that the density is not going to be spread over the particular red line area, because that will be occupied and probably prevent any further expansion of residential units on the site. This is an outline application. We can't surmise what happens in the future, and we do not have the details that will come under reserved matters. But the precedence, there is no precedence. This is another way of obtaining the right, if you like, resources to provide affordable housing within this borough. It's not just locally there, but we have the resources with this offset money to provide those particular essential affordable housing within the borough. And this is the context within which that contribution is taken. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a very interesting application. I'm just stepping right back from it. I find it very bizarre that we have a sort of stately home, admittedly it's a hotel or whatever, and we want to build in its grounds. It's a bit like a National Trust property wanting to build in its ground. To me, it doesn't fit, but that's just a subjective comment. However, I don't see how it seems to run a rail right through the sustainability criteria. I mean, it's so remote. You've got to have traffic, cars, etc., to do it, and it's also in a situation or location where we're hearing the maintenance charges are going to be so high. I mean, where is the sustainability argument in something that's, well, almost unaffordable and inaccessible? And yeah, okay, the 40% housing thing is a very interesting debate. I have a question. It's really not for now, but it's just who's going to build those houses? But it's in our policy that we would take money. So it is there's an opt-out clause, but the whole thing just doesn't seem right to me. So I'm very torn. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Councillor Frankham, did you want to make it?
Yeah, it's just I'm not convinced that the case for not having affordable housing has been fully explained. Certainly, I don't understand. I think we're missing some information, and I'm uncomfortable with that.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Just indulge me, Chair, really, and I know there's been commentary about precedents, but when you think of the position that we may arrive at in regard to this site, it seems to me in tactical terms, the future for developers can well be that you have a site, and if you want to lower the density in that site and create a particularly more expensive group of houses, really fairly substantial, you know, with all the benefits that go with that for a particular type of clientele. We've heard some comments on that. You can do that. By definition, the service charges increase pro rata, and that's going to be the future, I think, for a lot of housing sites. So if you want to avoid the provision of affordable housing, just reduce your density, provide more expensive dwellings, higher service charges, and then come back with this off-site contribution for affordable housing, none of which works as well as on-site affordable housing. And I think, quite frankly, if we want to compromise our policies in this way, go ahead and do it tonight in this regard, but it will set a precedent.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to come back on some of the discussion around affordable housing principally. There's a couple of other points I'd like to pick up on too. With the affordable housing, it's just to confirm to members that an equivalent contribution off-site isn't contrary to policy. It is allowed for within policy CN1 in exceptional circumstances. And our housing SPD does give some examples of what exceptional circumstances might be. In this instance, it's for reasons of the cost associated with the management company and the management, the carrying out of those activities. And the housing SPD states at paragraph 2.200 that one of the examples, if it's impractical for a registered provider to manage it on-site affordable housing, and I would extend that as far as being the costs associated with say the highways, the open space, which includes the management associated with nitrate neutrality, and also the packaged sewage treatment plant that's proposed. I think in that kind of range of examples of areas that would have an associated increased cost over other affordable housing examples in the borough, the developer has tried to engage with registered providers, and there's been a lack of interest as a result. So I think that's a point to make. A couple of other points to pick up on, I think it's probably been mentioned, but in respect to the size of the site is commensurate with the size of the site in the neighbourhood plan allocation, and does include the offset land for nitrate neutrality. So that would be on site, and that's quite a sizable area. And then just in respect of sustainability and some question marks around accessibility, I think it's worth bearing in mind that the site is allocated for development within the neighbourhood plan, and in being allocated in the neighbourhood plan must be in conformity with the borough local plan and the national planning policy framework. So as a whole, that is. So the sustainability, which is set out in the national planning policy framework, which is the national planning policy framework as a whole, sets out what is sustainability. So to be an allocated site, it must be sustainable in that respect. Thank you, Chairman. That was all.
Thank you. And Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the 2 points raised just recently by Councillor Potter is absolutely right. I'm sure it is possible to effectively price out affordable housing by making the units low density. I'm sure that can be done. And he's quite right saying that on-site is best, and I have always supported that. My problem with with affordable housing isn't, in this case, isn't a question of pricing. It's a question of location and access for people. I didn't say, and I didn't mean to say, that people who live in affordable housing are poor, but I said my phrase was not rich. And I think there is a very different distinction between the two things. We need to go forwards with this. We need to make a decision. So for that reason, I move the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Goddison. Thank you.
I'm happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goddison. It's been moved and seconded for the officer's recommendation for approval. I'm going to call the roll. And Councillor Court.
I'm sorry, Chair. I need to know if exactly what we are voting for, because the officer's recommendation. The officer's recommendation, which was to refuse.
Approval.
Approval.
Right. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Councillor Frankham.
Is different. Okay.
No, she says approval.
Councillor Frankham, I'm very concerned that you have got a paper that says differently to the rest of us.
I'm looking at the land at Oakley Hall, page 29, item 1. On the recommendation, should the requirements set out above not be satisfactory, the then planning development manager be delegated to refuse permission for appropriate reasons.
That is conditional, Councillor Frankham. If you look at the update paper, the recommendation is approval subject to the legal agreement, and that is all part of the legal agreement, which is standard in a lot of our recommendations. I'll start again.
Thank you.
Councillor Court.
For the recommendation of approval.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Goddison.
For.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham. Councillor Frankham.
Muted.
You're muted. We can't hear you. Councillor Frankham, you're muted. We cannot hear you.
Right, thank you. Refuse.
You're against.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Bound.
Definitely against.
Councillor Potter.
Against.
Councillor Tomlin.
Against.
And could I have Bernie?
7 for the recommendation, 4 against.
Thank you. That's carried. Officers.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that that application has been approved as per the agenda and the update paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 2. And if I could ask Councillor Greaves, please, to be up and listening. Thank you very much. I understand you're on board, and if you could just sit tight while the application is presented.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This is item number 2, at Lower Farm in Ramsdale. It's for the erection of a grain store, associated hard standing, demolition of redundant buildings, relocation of storage tanks, the construction of a weighbridge, and the construction of approximately 2 kilometres of farm access tracks. The application is recommended for approval, and there is no update to report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Greaves, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, councillors. I am speaking on behalf of Woodden St Lawrence and Ramsdale Parish Council and the residents we represent to uphold our objection to this application. Our comments made in 2018 are still valid, and we have concerns over the choice of locations. We believe this application does not meet Policy 3 and Objectives A, F and H of the Woodden St Lawrence and Ramsdale Neighbourhood Plan. These concern access and preservation of the landscape and traffic mitigation. The increase in larger lorries from a logistics company in Ramsdale has already been of detriment to the country lanes. Verges have been eaten away, the tarmac is crumbling away at passing places. There is a constant need to replace signage, and not to mention the near misses. The claim made in the report that the grain store will reduce trips from 925 vehicle movements to 541 during the harvest period still equates to a massive number of heavy vehicles using unsuitable roads and concentrating their movements into one area. The suitability of the A339 as an access road is still of concern, especially as the majority of the estate's land is on the south side of the A339. The Parish Council believes that a detailed analysis is needed of the additional large vehicle and slow-moving tractor and trailer impact on A339 traffic flows before this proposal can be safely considered. Lower Farm sits in a prominent position within the AONB. All of the proposed buildings would detract from the landscape, even with tree planting, green netting, and the tower being sunk into the ground. The public right-of-way on site must remain safe for all to use, and the views currently enjoyed should not be compromised. The opening lines of the report state that the proposed development would support rural economic growth to create jobs and prosperity. There is no evidence in the officer's report to justify this. I noted comments on fuel saving and labour costs, but nothing about growth and prosperity. It is the Parish Council's concern that this application is about operational cost savings and releasing more land for lucrative residential development other places on the applicants, in other places that the applicant owns. Thank you very much, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Greaves. Members, any questions for the Parish Councils? No. Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you, everybody.
Mr. John Leake, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, John, we can hear you loud and clear, and good evening.
Nice to see many of you again, see how hard you're still working. I did send an email to all of you in case my technological skills weren't up to this, but I will now just say some of the things that I put in that report. The officer has clearly been greatly impressed by the applicant's needs and less so about the environmental issues that I have raised in a number of objections to this proposal. Indeed, he acknowledges in his report that under several headings, the application is contrary to planning policy, but conveniently finds a way round these. Perhaps I could just comment on the officer's reasons for approval. Reason one, the development is merely providing a central storage area for the whole estate, albeit at the most northerly point of the estate. As a consolidation, it is more likely to result in less employment, and the estate will soon be 2,000 acres smaller anyway once the Roman Road development takes place. Reason two, it may provide safe access for the tractors and trailers by building the track, the mile and a bit track, but it means all the collection lorries will now have to use the road from the A339 down to Lower Farm, namely the U256. An additional traffic on a U road would normally be contrary to policy FP4, a policy which I actually fought hard to have included in the local plan. So it's ironic that I'm fighting one of my own policies, if you see what I mean. I note, I accept the reason three. Reason four, here the officer recognizes that there will be an adverse landscape impact, but claims that mitigation proposals are sufficient to ignore this. As we all know, landscaping with young trees and hedges takes many years to have any significant impact. The AONB, it appears, is to be sacrificed when an alternative site at Woodgarston Farm would not have a similar damaging impact because it is already well screened by mature trees, and even better, can be accessed directly off the A339 by the collection lorries. As that site is more central, it would also reduce the additional pollution caused by the tractors traveling further north than is really necessary. It is more isolated, so noise pollution becomes less important. The officer claims that, reason five, the officer claims that the proposal would not cause any significant harm to the amenities of the 4 adjacent houses. Can I say that grain dryers are very noisy, so that will affect the occupants, plus the additional pollution from the tractors and HGVs visiting the site. Basingstoke Road from the A339 to Ramsdale will carry far more HGVs, but as I am sure many of you are aware, it is narrow with blind brows over the hills, and immediately adjacent to this site, there is a blind left-handed bend.
You have 1 minute, John.
One final comment. On page 85, we are advised that there will be a need for an additional 1,018 tons of storage capacity. And yes, yet, as I said above, the estate will shrink from 5,500 acres to 3,500 when the Roman Road development takes place. Modern farming may help to improve yields, but the reduction in acreage must outweigh that likely demand. I'm aware from my time as the borough councillor that the contractor always wanted a central warehouse to use not only for the storage of grain on this estate, but also taking it from the many other farms that he manages, some many miles away. In conclusion, Lower Farm is not the right site. If they really want to go ahead with this, then Woodgarston would be far better in terms of environment and pollution, and indeed adhere to many of the planning policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for the speaker? No. Thank you very much, John.
Pleasure.
Mr. Goodall, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Goodall, we can hear you. And good evening, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to address Planning Committee in these exceptional times. The commitment of members and officers to maintaining this important committee function is very much appreciated. When this planning application was submitted in 2018, it was to address an urgent need to secure and safe grain storage. That need is now desperate as the existing substandard and outdated buildings have continued to decline. The proposals comprise 2 distinct elements, both of which I'll briefly explain. The first element is the grain store. This is a modern grain store to address the current needs of the farm holding. It is less than 1,000 square metres in area, and without the track's inclusion would ordinarily be permitted development and therefore not require full planning permission. In addition, and contrary to the views of some commentators, the proposed grain store is of modest scale and significantly smaller than a typical modern grain store, which are generally 1,600 square metres or more. The size of the grain store is a product of the land available. Accordingly, the grain store is designed to meet the needs of the farm enterprise and nothing more. It is therefore important to note that its capacity would meet current and anticipated future need and has not been designed to accommodate grain from other sources, nor to increase the output of the farm. That applies equally to the proposed weighbridge, which is for the farm alone and will also enable the sustainable use of farm inputs based on the accurate yield data extrapolated from it. The large adjacent elderly agricultural building is also proposed to be removed. This serves to offset any impact of the new building, which in accordance with best practice will be clustered with other buildings to reduce landscape and visual impact. It should also be noted that again and again, possibly contrary to the thoughts of some, Manydown has not had any new buildings, farm buildings, since the 1970s, with the only significant building work being the adaptation of existing farm buildings. The current buildings are in poor condition and no longer fit for purpose. Farming has and will continue to become ever more regularised, and the way we produce food, including its harvesting and storage, must be compliant. The proposed building will simply address these farming necessities of capacity and food safety.
You have 1 minute.
It will also allow grain to be stored in optimal condition, then released to the market in a phased way. This benefits the farm and local traffic conditions, as traffic will not increase and will instead be better phased. The current absence of appropriate storage means that much of the grain leaves the farm at the point of harvest, which adds to the inevitable spike in late summer traffic on the local road network. The second element are the proposed tracks. These have been included to divert harvest-related farm traffic from the A339. This has clear safety benefits and reduces the risk of congestion and delays. Inevitably, the harvest occurs over a short period of time in late summer and must be when the crop is ready and the weather is fine. Having the tracks therefore reduces inconvenience to other road users, and for much of the year, the unmade tracks will be unused or lightly used. I therefore trust you are able to support the recommendation of your professional officers, and thank you for your consideration of the points raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. You mentioned in your little speech the farm, and I presume by the farm you mean the Manydown farm in total.
Yes.
First question is, how many farms does that comprise? And my second question is, the track from Woodgarton down parallel to the A339 and then crossing it towards Wootton Farm, do you envisage all your lorries going into Woodgarton Farm then, going down that track and then crossing the A339?
The number of farms, it's not as straightforward a question to answer as it may first appear. The number of farms is, obviously farms get carved up over time. So it is the Manydown farm holding. So it's a single farming entity. In terms of the tracks, the tracks are not for lorries, they are for the tractors and trailers that will deliver grain to the grain store.
Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So that the lorries will deliver grain to Woodgarton and then tractors and trailers will then cart it all the way to Wootton Farm. Is that right?
No.
I'm having a bit of difficulty here. And you quite easily brushed over the number of farms that this facility will actually serve.
Well, in fact, I didn't brush over it. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I know that it is the Manidown Farming Enterprise as a farming entity.
And those farms will still be used. Well, the lorries from those farms will still be using Basingstoke Road, Kingsclear Road, Hook Lane, and the single track road from Monk Sherburn. Is that correct?
Well, the purpose of the proposal is to have a grain store to replace to a lower farm, which will serve the farm holding, and lorries will collect from there, and they will be able to collect over an extended period of time because the grain can be kept in optimal condition. So the lorries that may use the A339 to other farms some of that lorry traffic will continue because not all of it will be grain related anyway.
Okay, Chair, I don't think either I'm not asking the right questions or I'm certainly not getting clear answers. Thank you.
Any more questions for the applicant? No. Okay, thank you, Mr. Goodall. Questions to officers. Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor George, followed by Councillor Robinson and Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I note we had some drawings that appeared on the supplemental agenda, and I just wanted to get a bit of clarification on those. It would appear that we've got a very long single track road being laid alongside an existing single track road, and it goes underneath the A339 and loops round and comes up an adjoining country lane. Have I interpreted that correctly?
So yeah, the proposals include farm tracks, which, as the planning agent sort of alluded to, will be for farm vehicles as part of the harvest. So I think the intention is that they're not going to be made; they will just be created as farm vehicles, move up and down through the estate. It runs adjacent. I think you're referring to from the A339 down to Wootton St Lawrence and Manor Farm. That runs adjacent to a public right of way rather than a sort of a formal highway. And then yes, where it goes above the A339, it loops around the existing property there along the edge of the A339 to Wood Garston Farm, and then joins the existing farm tracks that already serve that part of the estate.
Right. Okay. So, is it actually crossing the A339 at grade? There's a drawing on page 5 of the supplementary pack. That's actually a farm crossing over the A339 at grade.
Yeah. So that is it. Those are proposed accesses onto the A339 where vehicles would cross at that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'd like a clarification on that. That one on page 5. That is a crossing of the 339. Is that, we've got to be clear about this because that's quite significant, I think.
Yes, that is the A339 as it states on the plan there. So those are the proposed accesses, which would serve the track that's being proposed.
Fine, thank you. Councillor, now who do I got next? Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of little issues here I'd like to raise. Firstly, on just a matter of, I suppose, consistency here. On page 93, I think we get the Highways Officer recommending the setback for the gates of 15 metres from the edge of the highway at page 93. But I noticed on the condition on page 97, condition 9, it's only 10 metres. Is there any reason for that, or is that just something that's sort of crept in there? Number one. Secondly,
can we take these, councillors? Can we ask Russell? Can we take these one at a time, please?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that the original highway officer may have said 15 metres. I think it was then later confirmed that 10 metres was acceptable following revised plans. So that may be just an error on my part to put the wrong number in, but it is 10 metres is considered acceptable by the highway officer.
Okay. Thank you.
Next.
Second, looking at the noise issue, I noticed there's some conditions around noise and things like that. The biggest concern I've got is, given these are basically unmade roads made in the end of the summer with significant traffic on it, is going to be dust. And I noticed there's a condition in there regarding dust during a construction change, but I've got a real concern here. These are going to be heavily used the end of the summer, and those sort of conditions where there's going to be an enormous amount of dust around, and we've got white down cottages and the house close by to some of these tracks and things like that. Has any consideration been made of dust, or is there any conditions in there to try and assess it, or mitigation methods to try and keep it down? Because it's going to be a real issue if these things are used for many days over the September period.
Yeah, well, I can confirm that the environmental health officer has considered the proposals, and there are no requirements in relation to the dust as you're referring to. So yeah, they obviously didn't consider that to be necessary.
Okay, I would have thought that was very, very important to have some experience of going out and picking up things and what have you. And the third one is, you know, there is a statement on page 95, I think, which was discussed, and I think Mr. Councillor Bound tried to get to the bottom of this. But can we condition the fact that they should not take you know, grain from outside a certain area? Is that possible, or is that something that we can't condition at this stage? You know, and how would we do that in terms of?
Can I just stop you there, please, Councillor? Greg?
Sorry, Chair, it was the previous question that I was looking to come back on in respect of the tracks and the potential for dust to come from the tracks. So the tracks only require planning permission because the first 25 metres are within 25 metres of any given highway. So where they're within 25 metres of a adopted highway, then they require planning permission. The rest of the tracks wouldn't ordinarily require planning permission, and in any event, they're not proposed to be formed of any material. So there's a question mark as to whether they're development at all anyway, and there's a condition to prevent any bringing on of material associated with that. So just a clarification as to what actually requires planning permission associated with the tracks.
Thank you very much. Right, Russell, if we could come back to Councillor George's current question.
I think that was in relation to whether it would be reasonable to condition a preventive condition stopping sort of grain being imported to the grain store. I think that's something that can be considered. I just so maybe discuss with Greg in terms of the enforceability of that kind of condition.
Thank you.
Right, we'll come. Greg, I think that was an invitation for you to contribute.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think you might be right there. So it's in plan. I think planning guidance generally is that we should look to avoid imposing personal planning permissions. So I think there'd need to be a clear reason for us to even consider imposing a planning condition that meant that the grain store could only be used by vehicles associated with the many down estate, and maybe the members decide that there is and choose to impose a condition on that basis. My main concern around that would be the enforceability of such a condition. I think we'd have to carefully consider the wording of any such condition, ensure that it didn't impose any unreasonable burdens on the applicant as well. So one is the enforceability and the question mark around enforceability. I'm not sure how we'd be able to monitor it, and it's just thinking off the top of the head, I suppose it could require them to keep a register of any deliveries that are made, but I think that could be quite onerous on the applicant to do so. So generally the advice would be no, that we should look to avoid doing so. And bear in mind as well that the grain store has been designed to meet the capacity associated with the needs of the holding. And therefore there wouldn't be on that basis any spare capacity, and that's the advice that we've taken forward.
Okay, Councillor George.
Thank you for those answers. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. When Mr. Goodall spoke, he told us that basically the grain store could be built on permitted development rights without any planning permission. And it's only because of the track that it needs planning permission. Could somebody comment on that? Is that actually the situation as we see it?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think that's set out in my report that an application was submitted for permitted development for that building, but that wasn't granted because issues regarding the site and design and potential landscape impacts needed further consideration. So yes, it wasn't considered to be permitted development for those reasons, and hence why this application is still running.
Okay, thank you. And if I could have a supplementary. This crossing of the A339, which appears on page 5 of the supplementary, is there any control over that crossing, or are we expecting tractors and trailers and large vehicles to just dive across between the traffic?
Yes, it would be a crossing, as most crossing would be. So that they would, general highway rules would apply. But yes, they would be crossing. It should be noted that the adjoining sort of public right of way is a byway, which could accommodate farm vehicles in any case. So there is already a crossing there. So it's just to the side of that. But yes, general highway rules would apply. And visibility displays have been considered acceptable, in consultation with the Highway Department.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just the one question, actually. We had from some of the speakers there the concerns about lorries actually on the narrow roads, and they cited the U256, which my understanding is the Basingstoke Road. One thing I have to say is I'm incredibly disappointed in the standard of these maps on the visualizer. You can't zoom in and get any clarity on the wording, and I find it all very confusing, and I'm usually pretty good with this stuff, I will say, and I don't know where this U256 is in relation to anything. So could I have some explanation as to where we're going to see the heavy goods vehicles go down public roads and the fact there's no passing places, etc., and any comments there from the highways team on that particular aspect? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So yeah, the U road referred to runs from the A339 towards Ramsdale. And that is the existing sort of highway that Lower Farm is served off. So the highway officer has considered the proposals and the traffic generation and the HGVs that would use that road, and they've considered it to be acceptable. Although they have noted that that in parts it isn't ideal, but based on sort of the visibility available, as well as potential spaces to allow traffic to pass, they don't raise an objection in that regard. In terms of a plan, I don't think it's particularly easy to show you an actual plan, but I think if I refer you to, I think it's page 21 on the visualizer that you've got, there is a photo looking towards Lower Farm on that page, which also has sort of a little image to the side showing where that photo was from, and that is from that road that serves Ramsdale from the A339. So that may be helpful. I'm just going to have a quick look through the other plans as well. I suppose the location plan on the visualizer, you can see that the road in question that runs to the right of the sort of the lower farm complex. Yes, yeah. So I think we've got that on the screen. If you keep going to the
yeah, that's okay. Thank you. I can see that now. So again, narrow country roads, but there's been no objection from the highways on that aspect. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I fully appreciate that the farm needs drying facilities for its grain. What I don't understand, and I was trying to get it from Mr. Goodall, there is a track that's being built from Woodgarton Farm down the side of the A339, and then it will cross the A339. This track, is it only serving Woodgarton Farm, or because he said virtually that lorries would come there, they would then apparently decant all their grain onto tractors and trailers, which would then serve that track. If it's only serving Woodgarton Farm, I can't see the point of it. So presumably lorries are coming to Woodgarton Farm, offloading their grain onto tractors and trailers, taking it all the way down that track, round the back of that bungalow, which is marked on page 4. It's on page 4 of our provided information, crossing the A339 and then going up to the new barn. Is that correct?
No, sorry. So I suppose page 4, you've got the track that leads from Woodgarton Farm to the A339 and does the loop around, I think it's Old Landers Bungalow.
Yeah.
That is a proposed track that's coming up, as you see on the plans below the access. That comes up from Wootton St Lawrence, from Manor Farm, up to the A339, and then it goes across to Woodgarton Farm, and that's where it joins the existing farm tracks, which then run northwards to Lower Farm, where the proposed grain store is. And I think, just for clarity, the sort of the grain lorries wouldn't be on these tracks. They would be on the highway going to Lower Farm, where the grain store is.
Yeah.
These tracks are for the farm vehicles when harvest is taking place, and it is to take those farm vehicles, the combiners, the tractors with the trailers, off the highway so they can reach Lower Farm and the new grain store without being on the highway network. They'll be able to travel across their own land. Obviously, they will have to cross the A339 at that point. Hopefully that's clear.
Sorry, just for clarification, the whole of this area is owned by the Manydown Estates, and they've got lots and lots of tracks which will feed into this. Is that correct?
They have existing tracks across the estate, yes. And like I said, from Woodgarton Farm to Lower Farm, there is existing tracks. So yes, these tracks will join onto those to create that sort of continuous loop, I suppose, from Wootton St Lawrence.
Okay, thank you.
Right. No other questions. Debate. Well, I'll kick it off that if there's nobody else going to contribute. The operation of the actual vehicles on the highway has not been contested by the Highway Authority. This is recommended for approval, and I see no reason, trying to understand the movement of the vehicles around the Manydown farm estate. It's as the applicant said, it's a huge area. That's not in front of us today. The front of us today is the grain store itself and basically the access to cross the A33. The farm track is a naturally made farm track by vehicles, and only in the, from what I gathered, in the harvest season. Now, if I have no one else, I've got Councillor Bound.
Just briefly, Chair, I mean, the proposal is for 271 metres, 2,000, that's 2 kilometres of farm access track. So it's not just a crossing of the A339.
I think I included the access track in my last statement. The access track, but the access track is created by the farm vehicles themselves. It's inclusive of that. Councillor Leeks.
Thank you, Chairman. What does concern me is the C road from the A339 down to Lower Farm. It is at the moment you barely get 2 cars go past, and there is a bit of like a very long straight road where you can't really get 2 cars go past at the moment. So you're going to get more heavy traffic down that C road, and that does concern me. But at the same time, farms were there before cars, I suppose, but they did have oxes in those days.
True. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the situation we are in, is it globally really, is that farms need to be viable. And if we don't allow farms to modernise and get on board with modern factory methods, they will become unviable. The farms will close down, and then the whole lot will finish up being put up for housing. So I think we really need to allow this. I do have my concerns over the crossing of the 339, but in general, we've got to allow a farm to modernise and become viable. Otherwise, we're not going to have anything to eat really one day. So yeah, once again, I move the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor George, thank you. Moved and seconded for approval. And I'll run through the list. Councillor Court.
Approve.
For the recommendation, Councillor Leeks.
Against.
Councillor Robinson. For. Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham.
Thank you. I think you've got control of my mic.
No.
Well,
nobody's
until it
touching
said the chairman said, I couldn't. I kept on pressing it. Anyway, for the approval.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormick.
For.
Councillor Bound.
Against.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Thank you. Bernie.
I have 9 for the recommendation, 2 against.
That's carried. Officers.
Yeah, so that application is approved as per the conditions set out in the agenda.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 3. Land at the Road of Harroway. And I call Councillor Clemps, please.
So, Councillor Miller, could I just interject, please? Looking at the list of speakers that was provided by the administration team, which is the up-to-date version, I would suggest that the Councillor Clem's reference is out of date and does not reflect him having registered to speak this evening. So there aren't any speakers on this item.
Ah, okay. I can only go what's on my update paper.
Yes, appreciate that. Apologies.
In that case, there are no speakers to this. Off you go, Lucy.
So there is an update to this application. First of all, the plans are on the additional agenda or the supplementary agenda that was provided, agenda item 5. There are plans provided. The application is for the variation of condition number 1 of 17-00352 to allow various additions and amendments to the scheme. The 2 dwellings have been largely completed, as can be seen on the site plan, and they are virtually ready for occupation. They have not yet been occupied, but they are virtually completed. Thank you. Nothing further to add.
I'd like to bring the attention of the committee to the update words on the update paper, because this application was called in to the committee by Councillor George. If you could just quickly go through that, Lucy.
Yep, won't be a second. Thank you. Yes, so we had a response from Councillor George, which reads, I have now read the revised officer report, which is now before us. This document goes a long way to resolve some of the apparent discrepancies and inaccuracies which were brought to our notice regarding the application, which was originally to be presented to the September 2020 Development Control Committee meeting. Whilst I still have some minor reservations, had I received the revised officer's report at the time I originally requested this to be referred to Development Committee, I would not have done so. Thank you.
Right, thanks very much. Do I have any questions to officers? And could you lose the visualizer, please? Because I've lost everybody. Thank you. Are there any questions to officers on this matter? If not, I'm going to move the application for approval from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McCormack, thank you very much. And I will go through the roll call. Councillor Court. Councillor Court.
Hello?
Hello.
I don't know what, sorry, I'm just going off the subject. I've tried to raise my electronic hand this evening and you don't seem to notice. And then Julia suggested I wave in front of the camera and you don't notice either. Which is the best way to attract attention?
Because at the time I didn't have them. The visualizer was up and it blocks my screen out. I didn't have a view of the committee. And until this last second, it's just come back.
No, I'm talking about the Oakley application. I ended up phoning Julia and now again, so I wasn't quite sure. Julia suggested I wave in front of the camera. So I don't know how best to attract attention. I don't know if my electronic hand isn't working on this iPad.
Well, I've picked up other councillors just waving the hand in front of the cameras. iPads tend to be, I've had problem with iPads before, from the chair's point of view. Is there anything you wanted to add on to this one, Councillor?
No, I was just going to second the recommendation. That's why I ended up waving my hand, but somebody else got in first, so not to worry.
Okay, thank you. We're in the vote at the moment.
For the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Leeks.
For.
Well done. Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Goddison.
For.
Councillor George.
Councillor George.
Oh, no, he abstained. He had a declaration of interest. Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Thank you very much, Brenny.
I have 10 for the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 4, Land at Panber Farm, Bramley. And I have, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hyde to speak. Lucy?
Councillor Miller, yeah, could I just reconfirm that the application is approved for permission subject to the conditions and informatives set out in the agenda report for the item number 3?
Yes, you can.
Thank
And
you.
thank you very much
Thanks.
for the interjection.
Thanks.
Mr. Hyde?
Good
Mr.
evening,
Hyde?
Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Can
Mr.
you hear
Hyde,
me?
yes, I can now. If you'd just like to hang on a second, we'll get the officers to introduce this application.
No problems.
Thank you, Chairman. This is item number 4, land Pamber Farm, Bramley Road, Little London. The application is for the change of use of land and buildings from agriculture and storage to use as a landscaping contractor business. The application is part retrospective. The application is recommended for approval. If I just draw members' attention to the update paper, there's a brief comment there which clarifies that the business would employ 5 full-time employees and 1 part-time, whereas there was a slight discrepancy in the report where 6 full-time was stated. So for clarity, it's 5 full-time employees and 1 part-time, and that's the only update there. So thank you, Chairman.
Fine, thank you very much. Mr. Hyde, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. We have worked hard to overcome both initial local concerns and also to provide all the necessary technical detail in order to achieve a positive recommendation from your officer, which we welcome. Councillors will note there are now no technical objections to the application proposal, and it has raised no objection from the Parish Council. Councillors may not be aware that Pamber Farm is our home, so our firm intention is to improve the visual appearance of the site and make it as attractive an environment as possible. We therefore welcome the conditions regarding the need for a landscape plan and habitat enhancement plan. We have continually sought to be constructive in addressing any concerns raised. Following local objections when we initially moved to site, we removed the unsightly shipping containers left by the previous owners. We have had ecological surveys undertaken and sought to solve drainage problems at the site. We have worked with a case officer to amend the proposed boundary and fence line in order to satisfy the landscape officer's concern regarding visual impact. You will note there is now no objection from the Council's landscape officer. Your officer report notes the policy support at both national and local level for the change of use of existing buildings. Given the nature of our business as landscape contractors, the vast majority of the commercial operations go on away from the application site. However, when our equipment is not on customer site, it will remain at Pamber Farm. May I now respectfully ask the councillors to consider the appropriateness of conditions 5 and 9 in terms of impact on the business. Condition 5 relates to the Grasscrete area marked as hatched on the plan and states that it shall not be used for the storage or parking of vehicles or machinery, we understand due to potential visual impact. As a landscape contractor, we would like to be able to place items of our equipment and tractors on the hatched area from time to time. Most of the time our equipment is out on customer sites or parked on the hard standing adjacent to the barn, but occasionally we would like to extend into that area. I would point out that the equipment is all based on agricultural farm machinery, usually seen on any farm. In the context of landscape mitigation and screening required by condition 3, with which of course we will be happy to comply, we would aim to provide appropriate screening in the form of natural hedging and trees. May I request councillors to consider if condition 5 is necessary and or reasonable. Condition 9 effectively limits our working hours and days to those stated. The nature of our business means that to take advantage of long dry days in the summer months, we start work on our customer sites at 7 AM and or finish at 6 PM on some occasions, meaning that one or two members of our staff and vehicles would need to start as early as 6 AM and return to the farm up to 8 or 9 PM. In addition, we sometimes need to load or repair machinery on a Sunday in preparation for an early start on a Monday. A further point is that the access track is owned by a local farmer and also used by his tenant farmers. Their tractors and combine harvesters are unlimited in the times they can use the track. Therefore, we would be unreasonably subject to stricter conditions than them. Our only residential neighbour, a Mr. Jason Tunnicliffe, is very supportive of our operations and has specifically stated that he and his wife have never been disturbed by any of our activity. As this condition is in the context of minimising residential disturbance and there are no other neighbours close by, I would ask the councillors to consider if condition 9 is necessary and or reasonable. That
If you could
concludes
wind up,
my
please.
briefing. Thank you very much for your consideration.
And thank you for that. Yeah, you got me right at the end there, and that's perfect timing, actually.
Thank you, Chair.
Questions to the applicant? Members, any questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. In the public observations, one of them says that the pond should be reinstated. Could you comment on that? Because I'm a little bit confused about that objection, and I'd be interested to hear what you've got to say about it. Thank you.
Certainly, the pond is actually a separate application that we put in, and that is part of our landscaping proposal, but it's not as part of this application.
Fine, thank you very much, and no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Hyde. Members, questions to officers? No questions to officers. Councillor McCormick, Robinson. You're muted, mate, Andrew.
Looking at condition 9, which the applicant wanted removed, how close are the nearest dwellings? I understand that the neighbour has been quoted as saying he doesn't have a problem, but how close are the nearer dwellings?
I think the location plan would be the best plan to refer to there. It's a couple of 100 meters. I don't think I have the measurement off the top of my head. Let me just double check. But yeah, that location plan, you'll be able to see the separation there. So Pamber Farm Cottage being the closest residential property.
Greg?
I think it's worth just highlighting as well that whilst the buildings are subject to the application might be separated further to the south, that the access does run past that property as well. And also the planning permission runs with the land, so there'll be nothing in the future to prevent the owners. I'm not necessarily meaning the immediate future, I mean in the long-term future as well, the owners of the existing buildings and the residents who currently own Pamber Farm as well to separate out the ownership of the landscaping business and the residential property that's just off the application site, but within their wider ownership currently.
Yeah, and just to confirm, it's actually from the boundary of Pamber Farm Cottage to the area of hard standing is approximately 65 metres, so closer than I'd stated, so 65 metres.
Okay. And Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Condition 5, these grasscrete areas, I'm a little bit confused about what the purpose of grasscrete is if you can't park vehicles on it and you can't park machinery on it. So I'd be interested to hear what officers think the purpose of that grasscrete is. And I can't really see any dimensions. How big, how many vehicles could potentially be stored on that grasscrete area if condition 5 was removed?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So yeah, the application we've had discussions with the applicant, and this is an amended plan. So initial concerns were raised in regards to the area of land that was being sought to be changed, change of use. And one of the issues were the encroachment of vehicles and machinery and items being stored beyond the sort of envelope of the existing farm. So the amended plan was submitted in consultation with the applicants to reduce the area and contain the area where vehicles would be stored and kept to within the area of the existing hard standing and existing yard. My understanding was that the grasscrete or a similar material was required in order so larger vehicles, lorries that are entering the site can go in and turn around and then be loaded when the sort of machinery is taken to site. So my understanding and the assessment of the application was based on that area as shown in hatched, not containing storage items or vehicles. That was for the turning of vehicles only. And that's what the sort of the assessment of this application has been based on. Can you remind me of your second question? Sorry, Councillor.
Yes, it's still on. Thank you, Greg. It's still on these grasscrete areas. How big are they? And actually, whilst we're at it, can you clarify exactly where they are? I'm looking on page 7, and I'm assuming from what the applicant told us that they're the two squares with a little bit sort of sticking out of them towards the sort of northwest of the site.
I think if you look at the proposed site plan on page 18 of the supplementary agenda, you can see that the hatched area is to the north of the existing 2 barns.
Yeah.
And you've got a fence line separating the existing hard standing from what is currently sort of agricultural field. And you can see there they've put in dimensions of the turning where the vehicles would turn. They've got sort of small tracking diagram there and a fence. I will see if I can grab a measurement of that for you, but that just you have to give me a couple of minutes to try and find that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Leeks.
Chairman, mine is on page 132, the last paragraph. It doesn't quite read right. And could we also get the terminology right? If it's accessible parking as opposed to disabled parking, and if it was disabled, it should be disabled, and we need accessible as opposed to disabled. So
yes, we will pass that on to officers and make sure that that is corrected.
Thank you very much.
Greg?
Chairman, whilst Russell's looking to provide those details on the dimensions, I just wonder whether, firstly, I'd note on page 18 there is a scale bar. It's difficult to read. It's in the bottom left-hand corner, but that wasn't the point. Yes. I was gonna make. It was more. Firstly, to point out that it's quite unusual that an applicant would maybe come to committee not having discussed with conditions that they might wish. The agenda has obviously been public for the last week, so obviously we would have considered that and been able to report to members our views on the request for the change of conditions through the update paper. On condition 5, I think you've heard Russell's reasoning as to why the proposal is for that area to be used only for turning, i.e. To confine the proposed use to the area of the existing hard standing. But on condition 9, I just wondered, it talks about hours of use. I just wondered if we were to insert the words audible at the site boundary at some point, so prevent any operations that were noisy, i.e. that could be heard beyond the site boundary outside of those hours. But if the applicants wanted to carry out work on their site that was inaudible, then that would be okay.
Yeah, and I can confirm that the depth of the area of grasscrete as hatched is approximately 20 metres with a square meterage of 1,280 square metres.
Okay, Councillor Owens is happy with that. no more questions to officers debate. Who'd like to kick this one off? Councillor Potter.
Sorry. Simply, I want to support the report as written. I'm happy to put that forward. I mean, in regard to condition 9, which I know Greg just made mention of, with respect, I mean, you can change the sort of subtlety and nuance of that, really. I mean, who would monitor all of that in terms of it being audible or not, and you know how that would actually work? I doubt the practicality of that, to be frank. And more important, I mean, despite the fact, and we often hear this, you get the sort of commentary of the existing near neighbour saying, I've got no problem with this. Well, neighbours come and go, don't they, really? This is a condition that should apply to the operation of this business in the longer term. So I think the clause 9, the condition 9, is entirely satisfactory as it exists, Chair, as I do with all the conditions, quite frankly, and I'm happy to propose a report of the officers for the approval of this application, but with those conditions.
And do I have a seconder? And that's Councillor Leeks. Thank you. Moved and seconded for approval as written with no amendment to the conditions. Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Bernie.
11 for the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Officers?
Yeah, just to confirm that application is approved subject to the conditions set out in the agenda.
Right, committee. We have had exactly 2 hours running. We've got 4 applications to complete. I would suggest we take a 5-minute break, comfort break, and I make it 25 to 9. We reconvene at 8:45. Thank you. Right, I think we're all here. Move on to item number 5, which is Riverside House, Wildmoor. And if I could have Mr. Cottrell, Mr. and Mrs. Blakely, please.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening. Well, if you just hang fire, and we'll have the application introduced by the officers.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for land within the boundary of Riverside House, Wildmoor Lane. The application is for the erection of 1 2-bedroom dwelling. There is the plans are provided within the supplementary agenda, and there was no further update. Just to give you a brief rundown on the proposal, the application site comprises an area of undeveloped land to the west of Riverside House off Wildmoor Lane. Wildmoor Lane sits to the west, separated by coniferous hedging. The proposal is for the erection of a single-storey 2-bedroom dwelling, 15.5 metres wide, 5.5 metres deep and 6.5 metres high. It would be constructed of timber effect cladding, sat on a brick plinth and with a grey slate tiled roof. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Cottrell and Mr. and Mrs. Blakely, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, and good evening, councillors. I just wanted to provide a quick context to our application. My husband and I have lived at Riverside House for the last 35 years, and we're now planning on retiring. So we wish to apply for a self-build bungalow just off the driveway to our house, basically to enable us to downsize and stay in Wildmoor, which we consider our home. Also, our house, Riverside House, is on 3 stories as it's near the river. And as time goes by, the steps will become increasingly difficult for us to navigate.
Good evening, Chair. The main reason for refusal at the moment is the landscape harm, and the landscape team have raised 3 main areas of concern, which I will address. The first one being urbanising impact on an open and undeveloped area of countryside. Now, I could understand the LPA's position if there were no built form in the surrounding area, but there are some 8 dwellings and around 12 barns and outbuildings, most of which are substantial in height and mass. And this plot is surrounded on 3 sides by other dwellings. The photographs you've just seen do not do it justice. It would appear that the officers have tried to quantify their decision using an appeal decision for the neighbouring site that's just over the hedge. This is a large agricultural barn that is currently being converted into 3 2-storey dwellings, and the applicants obtained permission for the conversion of the barn and then applied for 3 detached dwellings, which was refused and dismissed at appeal, which you've just been shown the pictures of. That appeal decision is being considered to form a material consideration. This comparison seems very unjust to me, as those dwellings range from 250 to 300 square metres and at an average height of over 9 metres. The inspector described those dwellings as being substantial in terms of mass and height, and to compare that to a single-storey 2-bedroom bungalow that's only 190 square metres with a ridge height of 6.3 seems very unfair. Given the location of this barn in relation to the site, I don't see how there can possibly be a landscape harm. This argument was put to the officer, which was dismissed as they claimed the views from the public locations would be harmed by this bungalow. This brings me on to my second point about visibility. The Sherfield and Loddon neighbourhood plan has been referred to in terms of significant views from public vantage points. When you look at these vantage points, it's not possible to actually see the dwelling from one of those, or see the site from one of those locations. And from the second one, you will only get small glimpses of the proposed dwelling. The view from the river has also been cited, but Water Bailiff's Cottage, Riverside House and a well-established hedgerow permanently screens the site from the river, which is approximately ½ a mile to the east. Wildmoor Lane is a very long way away from the site and is completely screened by buildings from Wildmoor Farm. The site is completely screened from the public footpath, except for when you are stood on the driveway to Riverside House, which is much closer to the footpath than the actual proposed site.
You have 1 minute.
Yeah, it is also claimed that existing vegetation does not constitute as screening. Yet you will have been told on many occasions that it does do that, and the last agenda is a case in point for that. Now, turning to, there's a barn that's currently being, an application that's in for conversion that's 110 metres away, and we've been led to believe that that's recommended for approval. That's in clear view of those significant views, and the landscape team have said no objection to that. In terms of character, the officer has stated that the conversion of the barn nearby, with its agricultural character and its materials and its relationship to the surrounding area, is in keeping. Our proposal is that we will be using timber-clad brick plinths, and that we will be, barn hipped roof, which is obviously in keeping with a rural area.
If you could wind up, please, Mr. Cottle.
Riverside House is also adjacent, and it's a very modern 3-storey dwelling, and your eye will be drawn to that as opposed to ours. And lastly, Chairman, if I may, just quickly, you all know about the 5-year land supply, and obviously paragraph 11 should be engaged when there isn't a significant harm to refuse. And I don't believe that because of the existing build form in and around this area, there is a significant reason to refuse it on landscape harm. And I'd ask you to approve this to allow my clients to self-build in an area that they have lived in for a very long time and would like to stay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you, any questions to the applicants, members? Councillor Bound.
Yes, just to Mrs. Blakely. At the moment, how do you get your bin to the bin collection point, which is some considerable distance from Riverside House?
We tow our bins on the back of my car. So we have a little hook and we hook the bins onto the back of my car, and then I drive it to a collection point, which is a common collection point for all of the 8 buildings in that little cluster there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
No more questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Cottrell and the Blakeleys.
Thank you.
Questions to officers? No, we've all read our reports diligently. Good. Councillor Tomlin.
Sorry, Chair, I was preempting debate.
I'm quite happy to enter debate. There are no questions to officers, so you're number 1. And you're a ward member, I believe.
I am, yes. I'm right. Basically, I brought this application to the committee for consideration because I visited the site. It was obviously easy for me to do. It's my ward, and the applicant asked me to come along and have a look. And I have to say, if there was a place or a site that needed a site visit, then this is one. And sadly, we can't do it. And if we start with perhaps some of the visualizer, these were my observations. The visualizer that shows the overall plan of the site, the blue line, the red line, it shows a number of squares. Now those squares are actually buildings and barns, and there are, as the applicant had said, 8 structures already there. 3 of them are permitted development in a barn, which is right in the centre of the visualizer. Which are 3 units. We've got pictures of them on the visualizer as well. There are the cottages there. There's another farm to the top left of the picture. And next to it is a barn, which is about, I'm sure, to be given planning permission to be converted to a dwelling. This particular modest-looking bungalow to go into the red area is right next to about a 15 to 20 foot high conifer hedge. It's in what looks like a small orchard of some small trees anyway. And it's a long way from the Riverside House. And we've read also that we can see the proposed dwelling from the River Loddon. Well, I would take umbrage like that because I walked along there and you can't see the top of the site from there. The public right of way is a deeply vegetated corridor a long way from the River Loddon across the driveway to Riverside House. And again, you can't see, because of these species, you can't see this proposed dwelling from there. So I don't see it as an open countryside. I see it as a small development, a small house, modest house amongst, well, it will be the 10th property in that small area. So it's certainly not setting any precedent, and it's certainly not alone in the countryside. So I just wanted to share that with members. And you know, it is an extra house in the countryside, but then we have the 5-year land supply to consider as well. So that was just setting the scene from my observation. So hopefully that might help some members understand where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other for debate? We have Councillor Tomlin putting a case that this could be, it's not as harmful as it would appear from some of the words in the report. However, the argument is, of course, there are various policies that we need to comply with here. Do I have any other contribution from the members? Councillor McCormick, thank you. And Councillor Potter.
Right, unmute. Yeah, happy to second Councillor Tomlin if he's moving for approval.
Councillor Tomlin?
Well, Chair, I will. Yes, if there's going to be no debate, I think on this one, I see it is, again, the reasons for refusal. It's sadly, it's sort of the opposite. It's the easy way out, but it's not. It's not going to make any, I think, undue harm, and thus be contrary to the policies of open countryside development. And it's not remote, etc. So it meets those requirements. So yeah, I'm happy to propose it then in this instance.
Okay, because the reasons for refusal we have to specify and possibly some conditions before we take the vote. So it's been moved and seconded for refusal, and the reason for approval to overturn the refusal, slip of my tongue. And I will ask officers to join in on this, Lucy. And could I confirm, Councillor Tomlin, that you're reversing the reasons for refusal in item 1 and 2 to the positive?
Yes, mainly item 2, because one is item 1 is, you know, is stating the obvious, I think, which it could be negated by the local plan, or the current lack of weight on that, because you could say it's completely opposite, but it's definitely opposite of 2. Okay, and thus it is not contrary in 1 to policies SS1 and SS6, etc. So yeah, okay, you're right. It is both, but the emphasis on 2. Is that
Greg?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think if I could try and assist here, I don't think there's any issue with there being one reason for approval put forward for the vote, pulling together in effect the opposite of reasons for refusal that are suggested by officers 1 and 2. And listening to the discussion and Councillor Tomlin's point, I've heard that he's identified that in his view there's limited landscape impact. So I think that limited landscape impact would need to be acknowledged within a reason for approval. And that limited landscape impact is outweighed by the benefits of the scheme, which are those associated with a single dwelling. So that would be the dwelling itself and the associated social and economic impacts of that. And it is just bringing in the paragraph 11 balance from the MPPF that is currently in the reason for refusal 1. It would be then the view that the harms don't significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits to such a degree that members feel that permission can be granted.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Councillor Bound.
Does the Sherfield on Loddon plan help at all? Because it says the proposed dwelling would be for a 1 to 2 bed private market dwelling, and as such would meet the need in accordance with policy H3 of the SOL MP. Is that any good? Is that relevant?
Question to you then, Greg.
I think that would be part and parcel of the benefits of the scheme. It would be the part of the benefits of the scheme would be the delivery of 1 2-bedroom dwelling, which I think you could acknowledge that is part of the clauses that the neighbourhood plan seeks to achieve, but I don't think it's part of what establishes a principle of development. It's more kind of what they're looking to achieve in terms of size of dwellings, rather than establishing the principle of development as such. So I think yes, insofar as it is part and parcel of the proposal, that the proposal is for a smaller dwelling unit, and that members feel that is of a benefit, and that benefit weighs positively in part of the overall balance in the assessment the members are then taking.
Fine, thank you very much. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, oh dear, stating the obvious about the dilemma we find ourselves in always on these, but in terms of the position which is recorded within the report about out-of-date policies, both in terms of local plan and neighbourhood plan, and the emphasis we are obligated to give to paragraph 11D of the NPPF, and I know Greg's made mention of it, but I think that's the line for us to take really when we make a decision on this application, really. And I think clearly our view, as much as I can gather it thus far, is that this isn't an isolated plot. There are enough dwellings in the near surround to establish the fact that it would be part of a small group of dwellings, a little hamlet in itself, off what I know Wildmoor a little, and it seems to me that we have sufficient there, if we choose to, that is, obviously, to reverse the recommendation that's put before us by officers, and I will certainly be supporting Councillor Tomlin and Councillor McCormick in this regard.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Sorry, just on the mention of the word isolated there, just to confirm that the officer assessment sets out that the site is not considered to be isolated, i.e. it's not considered to be remote. The harm that's identified is the landscape impact from the development of currently undeveloped parcel of land where there's no built form currently. Thank you, Chairman.
Yep, thank you very much for the clarification. Right, it's been moved and seconded with a reason for approval, and I will go to the vote on that basis, and then we'll consider conditions. Do you want to do conditions now?
Sure.
Yep.
Yes,
okay, go ahead with the conditions.
Thank you. So suggested conditions, 1 to be in accordance with approved plans, 2 time for development to commence 3 years, 3 materials, 4 soft landscaping, 5 hard surfacing, 6 boundary treatments, 7 removal of PD rights, 8 parking, 9 cycle storage, 10 bin storage, 11 in accordance with preliminary ecological appraisal that was submitted with the application, 12 tree protection measures, 13 utilities plan that also relates to trees, 14 drainage strategy, 15 pre-commencement contamination condition, 16 a verification of the previous condition in relation to contamination, 17 water efficiency, 18 construction hours, 19 delivery hours, and 20 site levels, and then obviously the informatives as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Committee, been moved and seconded. I will proceed to the vote. Councillor Court, this is for approval.
Or approval.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Robinson. He is not here. Councillor Goodison.
For approval.
Councillor George.
I abstain on this one.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormick.
For.
Councillor Bound,
4,
Councillor Potter,
4,
and Councillor Tomlin.
4,
Bernie,
9 for approval and 1 abstention.
thank you very much. That is approved. Officers, if you've got anything to add.
Just to confirm that the application has been duly approved, subject to the conditions that I read out earlier and any informatives.
Thank you very much. Move on, item number 6. And Mr. Benwell, please, if you could check in.
Good evening, Chair.
Fine. Good evening, Mr. Benwell. If you just hang on, we'll introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for 4 dwellings with associated parking and access arrangements at Appleyard, Woods Lane, Cliddesden. There is an update. The agent has now agreed with the suggested pre-commencement conditions. The site is situated off of Woods Lane, which is set back approximately 15 metres from the highway. The site previously contained a commercial plant nursery, which stopped operations in approximately 2000. It's currently laid to grass and enclosed by fencing. There are houses to the east, south and west, and to the north, paddock land with agricultural buildings beyond. The Cliddesden Conservation Area is set to the east and south of the site. There was also permission recently granted for several new residential dwellings to the south of the site along Woods Lane, known as Langdale Rise. Nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Benwell, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Michael Benwell. I'm a Director of Vesta Architects and the agent managing the planning application at the land adjacent to Appleyard in Cliddesden. I would like to start by saying that we're in full support of the case officer report, and we of course welcome the planning authority's recommendation for approval. Councillors will note that the application has received a unanimous no objection response from all consulted officers, and only a relatively small number of comments received by members of the public, including 2 letters of support. Since our first pre-application meeting in July 2019, we have been proactively working alongside Basingstoke and Dean to develop the current proposal. We firmly believe that this is a fantastic opportunity to invest in the village of Cliddesden and contribute towards much needed housing in the borough. To give you some history on the site, the land adjacent to Appleyard operated as a commercial plant nursery for over 30 years. The nursery closed in the early 2000s due to local competition, and the land has remained redundant ever since. The applicant purchased Appleyard in 2014, and in March 2015, planning approval was granted for the extension and renovation of the existing dwelling to create a large family home. Following the completion of building works in 2016, Appleyard was listed for sale and has since remained on the market for over 3 years. Feedback from prospective buyers highlighted 2 concerns. Firstly, that the land associated with Appleyard is disproportionately large and costly to maintain. And secondly, that the access road is a particularly narrow, poor quality gravel track with restricted visibility. We believe that the current proposal mitigates both concerns whilst also contributing positively to the village and wider borough. At pre-application stage, the applicant submitted a proposal for 2 new residential dwellings. Whilst it was acknowledged that these would provide a positive contribution towards the local housing stock, the case officer recognised that the contribution would only be small. It was agreed with the planning authority that the site instead suited 4 units and that a more complex scheme would perhaps not be suitable due to the site location and insufficient infrastructure to support additional dwellings. The case officer's report outlines that the current 4-unit proposal would be in keeping with the plot layout and the dwelling and garden sizes when compared with the character of the surrounding area. The site benefits from existing access via a private road directly off Woods Lane. The road currently serves 3 residential properties, and it is proposed that the access road is extended to serve an additional 4 dwellings and widened to improve the safe passage of the existing homes. To accommodate for refuse and fire tender access, the existing road is to be widened from 2.5 metres to 4.2 metres. To improve visibility and egress onto Woods Lane, the junction is to be reprofiled and vegetation trimmed back.
You have 1 minute.
Whilst the site is located outside the Clidston settlement boundary, it is surrounded by existing residential dwellings to the east, south and west, and would not result in an isolated form of development. There are several examples of backland development sites within the village that secure planning approval in recent years, many of which are situated outside the settlement boundary. The most notable example is an application for 2 new dwellings on the land to the rear of the Jolly Farmer pub, which was granted at Planning Committee in August. In summary, we believe that the proposal is well related to the existing settlement of Clidston and will respect the qualities of the local landscape. We recognise the opportunity to enhance the village and to provide a modest contribution to the local housing stock, and we hope that the committee will be in support of the application. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benwell, and thank you for your timing. Members, any questions to the applicant? No questions. Thank you, Mr. Benwell.
Thank you.
Members, questions to officers. Councillor McCormack and Tomlin and Bound.
Just a couple of niggly things. Just looking at the bin store on page 191. Just trying to place where that is in the overall plan, and it does look as if the car portals on that are a little bit on the narrow side, maybe a little bit narrower than the garages that are attached to the houses. And I'm just wondering if that's wise, given how wide cars are these days with all the metal bars and the doors and things. They've got a lot wider. I'm just wondering if that would be storing up problems, trying to get cars in and out of there and struggling to open doors and things. It's a problem I'm more than familiar with, having a 70s garage and finding that I have to be very careful if I park the car not to damage the paintwork on the car doors when I get out.
I think that would be more of a sort of personal way that you use the site. I appreciate your comments, but I think what's proposed is acceptable in planning terms.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes, yes, Greg. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, to come back. There was a question about the bin store as well. I think individually the properties kind of have their areas for bin storage, but there is on page 184, just to the west of plot 2, that there's a structure there that's you can just about make out the text. It says communal bin store. That's where that communal bin store building is.
Yeah. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment. In the report, it said that the County Highways officer comments will be reported on the update. They're not on the update. I wonder, have we got them? What's the Highways view, please?
Lucy?
Yes, the Highways team has not come back. So standing advice, it is an existing access, so standing advice would apply, but they are suggesting that there would be some regrading or reprofiling of the access and cutting back of the vegetation. So it is considered that it would actually represent a highways improvement in terms of visibility leaving the site. But no, we have not received any comments from the highway team.
Could I ask a question now? Excuse me, I'll come back to you in a sec. We have heard from the applicant that access road is going to be widened considerably. And doesn't that go along with exactly what you just said, Lucy?
Yes, that is a private access. So that in terms of the highways officers, they wouldn't comment on that aspect. But yes, widening it is going to make it a safer egress and ingress anyway. Thank
you very much. Anything more, Councillor Tomlin?
Well, yes, sorry, Chair. So the officer mentioned there about various things and improvements and whatever. Will that form a condition? I haven't read all the conditions, to be honest. Would we condition that because we haven't got their recommendation and we're putting in whatever the term you use, standing
Advice.
Yes, we have actually got a sorry to interrupt, Councillor. Yeah, there is a condition proposed that the application is carried out in accordance with the plans, because the visibility displays are actually shown on the plans as submitted.
Oh, okay. Right. All right. Thank you. I'm
thank
happy
you.
then. Cheers. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. And just a reminder to everybody, standing advice, when the County Council of Highways adopted that, we all got copies of what standing advice is. If anybody's got any doubt about standing advice, I can soon ask the planning department to distribute it again to the members of the committee.
Yes, please, Chair. That would be useful.
Okay, I'll make sure that happens. Yes, Greg.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Lucy said, really, about the condition regarding development to be in accordance with the approved plan. There is condition 1 that requires development to be in accordance with the approved plans generally, but there is also, just for members' information, a specific condition requiring the access to be set out. So there's actually a trigger there that requires the access to be set out prior to the occupation of the development. It's condition 7 for members' information.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the housing mix, as referred to on page 165 of the report, it's quite clear there that this, the 4 large houses on this site do not comply with the housing mix as we would normally have. So when you come to your justification or on the planning balance, is it purely because we haven't got the 5-year land supply that the housing mix then doesn't carry any weight with you?
Sorry, apologies. We're both trying to jump in. The housing mix obviously is one of the local plan policies, and we do give weight, to the sort of housing mix that we're going to get on developments. However, in this instance, this is a proposal for 4-bed dwellings. The site is well related to other existing residential development. It is it's well-designed scheme, and it would fit in well with the character of the area. We do have a housing land supply issue, so it isn't only the housing land supply issue that makes this development acceptable, and the fact that it doesn't comply with CN3 is not a reason to refuse the application, given the benefits of the scheme that have been set out in the report.
Okay, Councillor Bound. You just muted yourself.
I might mention it in debate.
Okay, fine. Councillor McCormick.
I mean, in principle, I think it's a reasonably sound application. A bit nervous about extra housing in Cliston when you've got that narrow woods lane that's a single track lane. It's quite busy and congested lane, and the visibility displays on the map are not great. I mean, you've got hedges and trees and things. I wouldn't want to be emerging from there looking 2 ways on a single track road, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if there's anything we can put as a condition or as an informative. In a lot of these cases, you might have convex mirrors put opposite, but that normally relies on there being something like a telegraph pole there or the goodwill of the landowner opposite. But that's about the only concern I have about this. Otherwise, I'm reasonably content with it.
So no questions for the officers in this case?
I don't think so, no, because I think that the standing advice should apply there. I'm just a bit, I don't know if there's anything more that we could do about the effects of, coming out on a single track lane where you definitely have to look both ways, and it is quite a busy road.
Lucy.
Apologies. In relation to the mirrors, I know that highways officers aren't keen on those because they give people a false sense of security. So that isn't something that we would suggest would be appropriate.
Fine. Thank you very much. Debate, members, on this one. And I've got Councillor Bound and Councillor Leeks.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I will be supporting this application, but I am disappointed with, from what the applicant said, the conclusion was with the officers that 4 dwellings would fit on the site, and 4 dwellings of the same number of bedrooms as well. It strikes me that the site would have taken more houses with a different mix, which would have given us sort of families with a smaller size more of an opportunity of buying one of these market dwellings. It's the housing mix I'm a bit disappointed with, but I will be supporting the application.
Do I take that as a proposal for approval?
Yes, you can do it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Leeks?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm like Councillor McCormick. I'm afraid that the road is an appalling road. It's very often, I go down there at least once a month. Well, having said that, I try now to avoid it, because every time I seem to go down there, I seem to hit Mr. White Van, and one of us has to give way, and it's normally me. It is what it is. It's Woods Lane, and it's a very twisty, windy lane. And it is only suitable for one car in one direction only. And yeah, it's a terrible, terrible road, very windy and not suitable for, you can't get many more houses in there because, although you can, because the bungalows and the premises that are there at the moment have got really big gardens, and it's appalling to think that there could be more and more cars going down that lane. So much as I would like to support it, I can't support it under those conditions.
Thank you. I've got a proposer for approval. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Potter, thank you. Proposed and seconded for approval. I'm going to go through the roll call. Councillor Court?
For.
Councillor Leeks?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson?
For.
Councillor Goodison?
For.
Councillor George?
For.
Councillor Frankham?
Abstain.
Councillor Grant?
For.
Councillor McCormick?
Abstain.
Councillor Bound?
For.
Councillor Potter?
For.
And Councillor Tomlin?
For.
Thank you. Bernie?
I have 8 for the recommendation, 1 against and 2 abstentions.
Thank you. That's approved. And officers?
Thank you. That application has been approved subject to the conditions and informative set out in the main report.
Thank you very much. Members, it's coming up to 9:20. We have 2 applications to get through this evening, and I move that we continue the committee and until we pass these, not past 10 o'clock. Has that got an approval from the committee?
I second that.
Thank you very much, and I'm getting indications that that's approved.
Chair, could I raise a point on this?
Yes.
We are, as you've already said, very tight on time, and we may finish up, depending how long debate goes on for, to having to drop one off. And I do notice that the last one on the agenda was dropped off last month, the last committee we did. I was just wondering if it might be prudent to take the last 2 in the reverse order for that reason.
Lucy?
Apologies, both these applications were actually taken, not heard at the last committee, so both of them have had the same effect.
Okay, sorry, I realised the last one hadn't. I hadn't realised that the next one had. So yeah, I'll retract what I've said. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Right. We're going to crack on then on item 7, And item 7 is over the page. And Mr. O'Donnell, please.
Yes, I'm here, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. And sorry, Councillor O'Donnell, I believe.
Thank you, Jim.
It's okay. I have to do a double take sometimes. And can I have the officer's introduction, please?
Thank you. This application is for the erection of one 3-bedroom dwelling with attached garage on land at Roundtown Farms. There is an update to the application. The first sentence for reason for refusal 3 should read, the proposed development would result in an unacceptable distance for the residents of the dwelling to reasonably travel waste recycling bins to the curbside collection point. Yeah, there was just a slight typo on the original agenda. The application is for the erection of a detached 2-storey dwelling with a link attached double garage at approximately 200 metres set back from Dickens Lane and access via an existing farm track to the east of the Grade 1 listed landscape of Hackwood Park. The proposed dwelling would measure 13 metres by 11.2 metres and be approximately 9 metres high. It would be constructed in brickwork with a clay tiled roof and painted timber windows and doors. A previous application for a dwelling fronting Dickens Lane was refused due to being isolated and not in a sustainable location, and due to the impact on landscape character and visual impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. O'Donnell, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and members. And I'm here as the Tunworth Parish Chairman representing the parish. First of all, having sat in your seat as members on planning in East Hampshire for many years, I kind of fully understand the reluctance we all had at that time, you may have now, to go against the recommendations of the officers. I also know that officers, when they do recommend refusal, do have well thought out planning reasons. However, I did find there were times where local views and some judgment had to be overlaid on our kind of quasi-judicial role. I genuinely and honestly believe that this is one of those occasions, especially as the officer's report seems to suggest that it is borderline in terms of the principles, policies, etc. And our local member, Councillor Rafael, is also saying the same thing in terms of it's quite borderline in that sense. The officer's objections are mainly based around the siting of the house, suggesting the isolation and distance from the road are negatives. We as Tunworth residents would strongly disagree and actually see this siting as a positive. The development is in such a position that it cannot be seen from any local property, and the whole setting and siting has been sympathetically selected to ensure the minimum effect on both local environment and the countryside. The applicant's original plan was to site the house right by the road at Polecat Corner. A planning inspector may actually see this as a better site and a more acceptable site. However, as local residents, we'd find this totally an unsatisfactory outcome. Recent developments made this corner, we believe, a bit of an eyesore, and further housing would make it, again, a mini settlement in the countryside. It would also be much more obtrusive to anyone living locally. The applicant, Mr. Dyer, consulted with us, and it was through these very constructive discussions that he moved the planned house to the present site. In our view, the applicant, Mr. Dyer, has done all the local hard work that you ask any applicant to do. He's heeded the advice and designed and in a location that we fully support. This is actually again supported by the fact the officers have listed 13 public comments on the report, and all are in full support. As far as I know, there are no negatives from Tunworth at all. So to refuse, well, maybe the planning tick, it may be right in that sense, okay? And again, I totally understand why the officers are recommending refusal. But I really do ask you from Tunworth and from the residents and from our local knowledge and the fact that you are allowed to show judgment, like the residents of Tunworth, you give this application your full support. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Donnell. Members, questions to the Parish Council? Nope, they're letting him off lightly.
Thank you.
And could I ask Ms. Downey and Mr. Dyer, please, to come on board?
Chair, just
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Sorry.
Yes, loud and clear.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair, just to let you know, it's only Mr. Dyer that's actually joined the meeting this evening.
Fine, thank you. Mr. Dyer, good evening. You have
Good
4
evening,
minutes.
sir. Thank you very much. I'm extremely grateful for your time. I've been advised to comment by the planning consultants on policy SS6 and the 5-year housing programme, but I'd like to use my time to explain why this house is of such importance to the future of my farm and set out why I believe the benefits do outweigh any harm. The farm is able to support a full-time employee, and that employee needs to be on site in order to fulfil the vocational nature of the role. Like many landowners, I'm faced with finding ever more efficient ways to manage the land, and to do this sympathetically requires a person who shares a love for the place, which comes from living here. It is usual to offer accommodation for such roles, and I've so far been unable to find anyone who's prepared to do the job unless I can house them. Although my family has owned the farm for over 20 years, we were unable to purchase the additional houses originally part of it. Before being passed to me, parts of the farm have been neglected and much work needs to be done. And previously, we've used external contractors, an extremely expensive way of doing this. Sadly, I do not have the funds to continue to manage it in this way. It was also linked to a second farm which provided accommodation at that time. The farm is now a standalone entity, one which I need to make sustainable. This needs a full-time employee living on site. With the removal of agricultural subsidy, I need to balance the need for efficiency with my view that the land needs to be managed less intensively. That makes the economic outlook challenging, and we must do more ourselves and diversify, both of which need to be done with care and sympathy to this very special place. The house is designed to reflect the local style, especially the houses at Polecat Corner. The shape and size of the plot has been driven by wanting to make the tree belt match the line of an existing wooden hedgerow to fit the surrounding landscape. It is cut into a slope to maintain a low profile, and the house needs to be able to support a family in order to attract and retrain a worker long term. It's very important to me not to propose a scheme which might need extending at a later stage. In addition to arable land, in arable production, we have woodland and grassland, and this worker will manage and support the arable business, currently the only source of income. They will need to supervise, assist, and provide access at all times and ensure security while doing so. The woodlands are a precious resource. Some are ancient and all need sympathetic management to ensure their health. Sadly, there is a significant amount of ash dieback which needs urgent work. Our worker will manage this forestry work as part of a 5 to 10 year plan and avoid reliance on the more efficient but much more intrusive and potentially damaging large-scale contractors. There are numerous roadsides, rights-of-ways which need maintaining. We also wish to diversify into a small number of livestock to gain income from the grassland grazing. Apart from the benefits of having another family working in the rural economy and our close community, issues of safety and security are of concern. Recent occurrences include trees being blown down across public access and needing to be cleared, lost people, trespassers, a vulnerable person found, an emergency landing by a glider, hostile reconnaissance for potential burglary, 1 successful and 2 failed attempts at break-ins, and antisocial behaviour linked to the lay-by on the A339. The latest incident was notified to me by the police tonight during this call.
You have 1 minute.
I'm enormously proud of Hackwood, passionate about its history and future, and I recognise the privilege and responsibility which comes with managing land. I clearly do not believe this scheme negatively impacts the area. Currently, I am employing someone who has been staying with me, a situation which is unsustainable. And whilst they want to stay, I need to show them a route to their own accommodation, and affordable housing is not available nearby. This house really will determine the future of my farm, and without it, I do not see it as sustainable. I'm most grateful for the support of our local community, the parish councillor and local councillor, and for your time, especially at this late hour on this solemn day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer, and I appreciate your last comments as well. Members, questions to the applicant. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. On page 198 of our report, it goes on to 199, it mentions the fact that in the application description, you didn't refer to a farm manager's dwelling, but in the appraisal, and there was no appraisal as to the farm being a going concern. But going back to the farm managers, is it going to be for a farm manager?
Am I still live? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are.
Oh, sorry, thank you. So it is going to be, it's going to be for a farm worker. Manager may be a slightly grander title, though there's management involved. This person is managing and delivering on the farm. The reason we didn't go for an agricultural need is because that requires, as you know, a 3-year business plan with cattle, etc. And our need is ahead of that. Yeah. So that's why it's not under an agricultural basis, but this is for a farm worker.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Nope. Mr. Dyer, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, sir.
Councillor Fell.
Chairman, I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear, Mark.
And thank you for allowing me to address the meeting. I am fully supportive of this application, and I'm speaking to urge the committee to approve it. Once you've waded through the officer's report, you will have realised that because of the 5-year land supply, there is a presumption in favour of development. And the questions for you to consider are whether the proposal causes such harm to the countryside or is so remote that it is unsustainable and that it should be refused. The local residents, as you've heard, didn't support a previous application, which was by the road, and that is marked out on the location plan on page 347. Despite the fact that it was close to the housing at Polecat Corner. And the reason they didn't support it was because of the landscape. They saw that it harmed the landscape in such a prominent position. It should be pointed out, as you've heard from the officer presentation, that the officers didn't consider that location sustainable, even though it was next to other housing. And they didn't in a previous application at Polecat Corner, which your committee decided about 5 years ago when a house was put in the back garden at Polecat Corner, which I supported, and you as a committee agreed, despite the officers saying it was unsustainable. You clearly thought it was because there were then 4 houses next to each other, one just over the way and another one just round the corner. The difficulty, I think, for officers assessing this is perhaps a misunderstanding of the parish of Tunworth. Virtually every house is surrounded by fields. And therefore, if you look at it from perhaps an urban perspective, it all looks remote, but it isn't. It's very close together. And to put that into context, this proposal is halfway between the house where the applicant lives and the main road where there's other housing. And if you look on page 347, to the right it says Hackwood Farm, but you wouldn't know, but actually that is 3 dwellings because the stable block's been converted and the barns have been converted. And they're all close together, all walking distance, certainly cycling distance. And the aspect about bins, well, an awful lot of people, unfortunately, who live in the countryside, as you heard in an earlier application, have to use other mechanisms to get bins to the front gate. Otherwise, the dust carts will spend an awful long time going up these driveways and never getting round in a day. So what we say to you is this is clearly in a sustainable location. That's why the village supports it. What you also won't know, because unfortunately you probably haven't had a site visit because of the circumstances, is this is around a very gentle bend, so it can't be seen from the road. It's also been cut into the ground, so it's not prominent. So in no way could it be saying now that it harms the landscape. That's why the parish chairman has come forward and said, we on behalf of the parish support it. And that's why obviously I've received no objections to it in its current location. Not mentioned in any great degree in the officer report is the pond that's going to be built to enhance and improve biodiversity. The parish of Tunworth,
1 minute.
The parish of Tunworth doesn't have any open water for 12 months of the year, and therefore this would be a great improvement to biodiversity. So, which is a good thing. Finally, the applicant mentioned, and I don't think this is perhaps a direct planning ground, but he has been, and I can certainly support this, a victim of crime on other occasions from all sorts, and as well as antisocial behaviour. And certainly having someone halfway up the driveway living there would protect his land and obviously protect the wider parish as well. So I fully support this. I'm happy to answer questions if you wish to do so. And thank you for allowing me to address the meeting. I urge you to say that it is sustainable and doesn't harm the landscape.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, committee members, any questions for Councillor Raffel? No. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mark. Could you just recap? You talked about the actual Hackwood farm itself, but did you say
well, is it an active farm as we would understand it? Or you mentioned residential conversions. I mean, is this the working farm that we're talking about?
No, I must clarify. Hackwood Farm originally, of course, was a large open farm. Mr. Dyer's land is effectively where there's a straight line that goes all the way up to Polecat Corner, where the words New 5M wide, then there's a straight line, then there's tree belt. His land is everything to the west of that, going to the A339, wraps around Hackwood House.
Right.
And his land is to the south of the picture. To the right of that line is in the ownership, part of it of the main house of Hackwood. And then his land, if I understand it correctly, I may be mistaken on this, Mr. Dyer's land, it goes round a bit to the right, to the bottom, but you can't see it on your picture. Hackwood Farm is I think the right thing to say is a residence now, as it were. There's an old house there, a traditional old-fashioned big farmhouse. Stables to the side, which says the cottage, whereas others live there. And then the barns at the back have been restored. In fact, I think there's more barns than are in the picture there, very old barns. And they're a residential accommodation too. And they're accessed from the right, on the road on the right there, and not up the leafy track up there as well. So they're not part of his. I don't know whether he's referring, he might have been when he said there was originally 2 farms, but this was all, I think, predates his time.
So sorry, one last thing, if I may. His farm is somewhere off to the west.
Everywhere to the left, including the land where the site is.
Yeah, but his farmstead, if you like, the housing and that is all.
Oh, his home is directly due south.
Right. Okay.
If you follow, see the lane coming from Polecat, which obviously has where next to it where it says this site, and you'll see it bends slightly and then comes to the bottom of your picture. If you imagine that it then went right underneath the picture to the centre of the page, his house is roughly, as a guess, where page 347 is typed.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
And that lane goes straight to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Any more questions? No. Thank you, Councillor Raffel. Questions to officers. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Would this be something suitable for putting a condition on it that it could only be used by farm workers tied to this cottage, tied to this this farm? Because what I would hate to see happen at some time in the dim and distant future, you know, possibly with the new owner of the farm, who knows what's going to happen one day, that this gets sold off as a private house. So could we condition it that it is tied as an agricultural workers?
No, we couldn't, because the application has been submitted as a normal dwelling. There's been no justification or information submitted to support the need for an agricultural workers dwelling or a farm workers dwelling. So no, you couldn't have that condition.
Right, any more questions to officers? Move to debate. Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard from I'm very familiar with this site because it's right on the edge of my own ward. We've heard from the local councillor, Mark Raffel. We've heard from the parish council. We note that there are 4 letters of approval and none of objection. I find it quite difficult to think of any reason why I wouldn't wish to support this application for approval. Looking at the reasons for refusal, harmful to the character and appearance of the landscape in this location, I don't believe that to be the case. The distance of the waste, the bin collection area from the house, that's a problem for the occupants and not for anybody else. It is reasonable to argue that this is in a very isolated location, and therefore to what degree should we be taking that into account. I rather hope that we would follow the recommendation of the parish council and be prepared to exercise a bit of judgment in this case, because it's very similar to item number 5 in many respects. And I feel that in the circumstances, I can't think of any good reason not to support this for approval. Thank you.
Councillor Goodison, is that moving to approve this application?
Unmute again. Well, I'm certainly willing. Yes, I mean, I'm very happy to listen to comments that other people might wish to make on this issue. But on balance, I'm happy to recommend it for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at this, I've got a great deal of sympathy with the officer's report on pure planning grounds. I think, you know, it's clearly something with without the local knowledge we would probably, you know, support. But, you know, as we have with other applications tonight, I think it really does rely on this local knowledge and the local opinion. And I think, you know, that given, you know, the lack of objections, the support given, and the reasons that this is claimed to be, you know, useful, what's going to be useful in the future, I think I would tend to say that that's probably what we're here for as a committee, actually, to understand the local conditions. And, you know, I would be happy to second Councillor Goderson's proposal for approval.
Right, thank you very much. With that, do I have any other brief comment? Because we will go straight away to reasons for approval, which I'll try and help you with, Councillor Goodison. I'm looking at this isolation that says on page 193 of the report, in an isolated location in the countryside. I think that's been argued through that it's not a particularly isolated location because of the other residents that are in the immediate vicinity, and in fact the owner's farmhouse is even further away. So it's not contrary to the NPPF, and it would not be harmful to the character and appearance of the landscape in this particular location. Now, I'll seek officers' guidance on that for reasons for approval for this particular application. On the proposal, Lucy or Greg?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think we've heard from members that obviously the report sets out what the definition of isolated is in terms of where it's far away from other places, buildings, people, and remote. And the report sets out the officers' review that it is isolated and remote, and that there is a landscape impact as well. Obviously, these are subjective matters, and it's for the members of the committee to reach different decision, obviously, and then take a vote on that. I think from the discussion I've heard that it's not considered to be particularly isolated. I suppose that's in the wider context, but it's also that I think I've heard that it said that there's no landscape impact, or there would be no landscape impact by virtue of the local conditions and the details of the proposal themselves as well. So again, it comes back to that paragraph 11 balancing exercise. I suppose if members don't consider that the site's particularly isolated in the wider context, or is even not isolated, and there aren't any landscape impacts, and consider that there are benefits associated with the delivery of a single dwelling, both social, economic, and the actual provision of a dwelling itself, going towards our 5-year housing land supply, then obviously members can look to put that balance together under paragraph 11 and reach a conclusion where they may wish to recommend it for approval and take a vote on it for approval. Obviously, Lucy will want to come back with some suggested conditions if you move to the vote on that. Thank you.
Well, before I move to the vote, I've been proposed and seconded on that basis Then yes, let's move to conditions, please. I've heard no other comments.
Thank you.
Lucy.
So suggested conditions are obviously approved plans, time for development, 3 years, materials. I did hear councillors refer to the wildlife pond, so perhaps suggesting a habitat creation scheme, including the wildlife pond and wildflower meadow, construction hours, delivery hours, parking provision, water efficiency, bin storage and provision, hard and soft landscaping, again, the contamination pre-commencement and then the verification and remediation condition, site levels and a drainage strategy.
Thank you
And
very
obviously
much.
the normal informatives at the end as well.
Yes, indeed. Councillor Goodison and Councillor George are quite happy with those conditions and the reasons for approval. Members, on that basis, I'm going to go to the vote. And we'll start with Councillor Port.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know, but I did have my hand raised again, and I don't think you saw it, and I don't know, I haven't lowered it yet.
I haven't seen an indication from you, and I don't know what goes on, but you change position on my screen. It leaps around here. Do you have something to say, Councillor Court?
No, I won't go into it now, but for the application.
Thank you. My apologies if I missed it.
Well, I need to sort this out, I think. Maybe I'll contact IT tomorrow because obviously the electronic hand's not working and waving doesn't work.
I have no indication of the electronic hand on my screen. I have to have this on full screen. Sorry?
I haven't lowered it yet.
Yeah, I don't have it on my screen. Maybe I've got the wrong selection, but
there's a participants panel to the
Yes.
right with it on. I can see it.
Unfortunately, on my other screen that I have it. Anyway, I won't go into it now.
Okay.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bound.
Against.
And Councillor Potter.
For.
And Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Brenny.
I have 10 for the recommendation and 1 against.
Thank you very much. That's approved. Lucy.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that application is approved as per the reasons for approval set out earlier and suggested conditions and informatives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to move on to our last item, number 8. This is Hayes Days 1B, Linden Road, Basing. And if I could ask Mr. Freer to come forward, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Mr. Freer. If you just hang on, we'll introduce the application.
Thank you. This is an application at Hazy Days on Linden Avenue in Old Basing. The proposal is for the erection of a single-storey extension following the demolition of an existing porch and the erection of a first floor rear extension. Nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Freer, you have 4 minutes.
Okay, I hope I'll make this as quick as possible so we can fit it all in. So there are 3 parts really to the proposal. The first part, which is the demolition of the porch, has been, and the erection of a new porch has been granted under a previous application, which includes a currently completed rear extension. So hopefully I don't think that part of the application is contentious, but I thought it would be best if that was part of this application so we could close the other application and add it to this one to reduce the administration overhead in the planning department of having 2 applications on the same property. The second part is the ensuite, which is a first floor fill-in above part of the current kitchen. That doesn't have any windows that overlook the neighbours. So again, I'm hoping that that isn't any contentious issue from there. And the third part is the lounge extension, Originally, I put that in as a 2-metre depth, which was in line with the porch, and then up to the boundary with the neighbour, which is 3 Linden Avenue. And I based that on another semi-detached property that I'd seen in Basingstoke. So at first, I didn't think that that would be an issue. And I thought it would be advantageous to the neighbours that if they wanted to do the same at some stage, it would be easy for them just to build onto it. However, after guidance from your planning team, I suggested there was a possible issue for light, and the neighbours said the same thing. So I amended the plans to move the boundary wall in 0.5 metre from the neighbours, and then reduce the depth of the extension at the front to 1.5 metres, so stepping it back from the porch. Now, that does give a 1 metre distance from the neighbouring window of the neighbour's house to the wall of the extension. The extension roof also has a hip to try and reduce any further light issues. And considering that both the properties do actually face due south, so any light issues will be minimal for the vast majority of the day. And if there is any effect later in the day, then hopefully the changes that I propose should minimise that. And lastly, I'd just like to bring to the attention that some of the, if you can see from the location plan, I don't know which one of your documents that's numbered as, that there are some semi-detached properties just across the road and a little bit further up. It doesn't say what numbers they are on the plan, but they have also had large extensions done both to the rear, to the side, and also to the front. So I don't think there's a problem with coming out to the front. And also that our property 1B is on a large plot, so there's plenty of room still at the back, to the side, and to the front. Hopefully you'll agree with me that the light issues for the neighbours aren't in any way significant, and you'll grant permission for this application. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Freer. Questions to the applicants, members? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Greer, could you tell us, I appreciate your proposed ensuite window will probably be opaque, but if you were looking out of that window, you'd be looking down into what I estimate would become about a 1 metre wide alleyway between your building and your neighbour's building, and looking at the sort of cat slide roof at the back of your neighbour's building. Would you be looking down? Are there any windows in your neighbour's property facing towards your property in that sort of alleyway area?
No, there aren't any at all. We'll be looking straight out onto a tiled roof.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions to the applicant? No. Thank you, Mr. Freer. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Members, questions to officers? Nope. Debate. Councillor Potter.
Not debate as such, really. I mean, I find no fault in the report and the proposal that's before us, quite frankly, Chair, and I'm happy to move the report before us for approval.
Councillor Tomlin.
I'll second that, Chair. I have similar view. Thank you.
Right, it's been proposed and seconded for approval, and I will take the roll. It's Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Goodison.
Against.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormick.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Thank you, Bernie.
I have 10 for the recommendation and 1 against.
Thank you very much. Officers.
Thank you, Chair. That application has been duly recommended for approval and subject to the conditions and informative set out in the agenda report.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody who's attended tonight. I just made it. And I think we're getting there. I think 1 or 2 reminders that I've had